Baseball isn't just numbers, numbers, numbers.
This game is not being played on computers.
You don't do that with a bunch of statistical gimmicks.
You don't put a team together with a computer.
We're talking weighted runs created plus,
expected WOBA,
his sweet spot rate,
defensive runs above average,
average exit velocity,
barrel rate,
xFIP,
BABIP,
SIERA.
We are above replacement radio. And welcome to Above Replacement Radio, where we're talking baseball kind of whenever. I'm your host, Chris Gianta. Over there on the other side of the screen is Daniel Curran. How you doing, Daniel?
Chris, I'm doing really well today. For the first time in what feels like kind of a while, we have major offseason news in baseball. We had Josh Hader last week or 2 weeks ago, and that was pretty cool. But this week we had, I think, one of the most shocking trades in terms of how much we saw it coming, how much we saw fit with the team, with player being in rumors or lack thereof, that I can remember in a very, very long time. Corbin Burnes is a Baltimore Oriole.
Yes, indeed. And with the news, like, it wasn't just a bomb drop, it was a complete sneak attack. It was we were completely unprepared for this, but sort of happy to hear the news, but also sort of, unfortunate as a fan of someone in the AL East. However, yeah, this was incredibly stimulating for a baseball fan who's not been stimulated in terms of big moves and big acquisitions here. Yeah, pretty incredible. Corbin Burnes goes to the Orioles for Joey Ortiz and DL Hall. Couple prospects. Corbin Burnes has 1 year of control remaining with the Orioles, so if the Orioles want to keep him longer, they'll have to extend him or sign him in free agency next year. But yeah, what did you think about this move here?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was definitely, in terms of shock value, one of the craziest trades that I can remember in recent memory. There was the last time we had heard any kind of rumors about Corbin Burnes being on the trade market was really never. There was some maybe theories about the Brewers trading him because he had 1 year left. They let Brandon Woodruff go. There was the discrepancies between the front office and him in the team's arbitration hearing for him in 2023. But I don't think there was ever serious rumors. I don't remember any teams being attached to him. The Orioles certainly weren't attached to him, if any teams were, or at least publicly. And I mean, Ken Rosenthal was the one who broke the trade, and he did it with a full article on The Athletic. It wasn't just a tweet that said Orioles getting Corbin Burnes packaged, come in a little bit. He had a full article on The Athletic saying the trade's done. Corbin Burnes is going to the Brewers. They're getting DL Hall. They're getting Joey Ortiz. And everyone else kind of followed suit after. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely one of the most shocking, didn't see it coming, and it happened right there in that moment type trades that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, for sure. And especially it wasn't just shocking because a high profile starter, a pitcher in which a lot of people have him in their top 10 positionally. Like, it's not only that he was left, but or was traded, but also that the Orioles are the team that are getting that guy after, pretty much they've been rebuilding or, not in win now mode since 2016, 2017-ish.
I mean, yeah, you can't forget 2017 when they went all out with the Jeremy Hellickson trade, and that was the only thing they did at the trade deadline. Yeah, I mean, we've been waiting on the Orioles to make a move like half as big as this for some time now, right? Like they started to break out in June of 2022, July of 2022. They sold Trey Mancini at the deadline. They sold Jorge Lopez at the trade deadline, and Mike Elias was like, "Hey, not yet." Right? Like, we're gonna, it's coming. Now is not the right time. We got to keep building. And they ended up finishing that season over 500. I think their big acquisition of that offseasons were like Cole Irvin, Kyle Gibson, a couple of innings eater type starters, but no one of real impact. They won 101 games and got swept in the playoffs and had been quiet other than signing Craig Kimbrell as a replacement for Felix Bautista in terms of this offseason. And people kind of had the idea of, okay, Are they gonna keep building on what they have, or are they just gonna hope that this core does it before they all leave in free agency? And I don't think anyone was expecting this move, but I mean, they went up far above and beyond what anyone was asking them to do.
Yeah, 100%. Uh, and yeah, this does seem to have some correlation with some other news that happened, which is is Peter Angelos, the Angelos family in general, is selling the is selling the Orioles for about $1.7 billion. There's a certain group, you know how these ownership groups work. It's
Carlisle
kind of,
Group.
yeah, it can be weird with who's involved, but it's a new group that's in charge, or that's going to be in charge in Baltimore. And I think there is just a little bit more of a vote of confidence within the front office that you can go out and make these moves, because you don't have to worry about stocking up prospect capital in case other players go, because maybe those other players aren't going, and you can keep them and extend them and lock them up long term financially.
Yeah, I mean, it's very fun to see when a new owner comes in and shows everyone how cool it is when an owner that is less than ideal sells the team, right? The Angelos family uh had a statement this summer talking about how, like, if they gave if they released their financial records, they would like, people would see how bad a 150 to 200 million dollar contract would be for them, how it would cripple them financially, and they would never be able to do anything else. Of course, they did this without releasing their financial records, which probably would have shown otherwise, because Major League Baseball is one of the most profitable organizations out there. And yeah, I mean, this new group, Carlisle Group, which is led by David Rubenstein, who is an Orioles fan. Grew up an Orioles fan in Baltimore. I mean, it's the second time we've seen something like that with Steve Cohen with the Mets. And yeah, I mean, immediately, right? Like the day after the sale happens, uh, maybe the biggest move that the franchise has made. I don't even know how long. Definitely in my lifetime, it feels like, right? I mean, when was the last time we've seen the Orioles slash St. Louis Browns go out and make a move this big, like getting Frank Robinson, maybe?
Yeah, it would have to be that. Um, Back in 1966.
Like, I guess trading for Adam Jones, but like that wasn't that big of a deal at the time?
That was also a kind of a sell move, because they were trading Eric Bedard,
Mm-hmm.
who's coming off, of course, his
That's
famous
true.
200 strikeout season. Um, but yeah, that was like a rebuilding mode. So yeah, it was
Mm-hmm.
like, this is by far the biggest splash that we've seen the Orioles make, probably in our lifetimes, in our 23-year-old lifetimes. So I mean, yeah, it's a major, like, breath of fresh air, especially in this off season, where it seems like the only splashes being made are in LA and New York, maybe San Francisco if you count like Jung Hoo Lee and other guys like that. But in an off season in which a lot of teams are sort of still on the brake pedal, most notably our favorite team, the Boston Red Sox, who have just gone from saying they're going full throttle to saying that their payroll is going to be lower than it was last year after back-to-back last place seasons. Like, it is very refreshing to see a team not in New York or LA go out and make a big move and really add to their 2024 team. So that's, as a baseball fan, where I feel just the most happy. Is it's not going to be it's like, owners or organizations in general can stop pretending about the big market thing.
Yeah, if the Orioles go out and they extend Corbin Burnes, I think it's going to demolish whatever narrative that other small market owners try to make up about what they view as being wrong with today's game of baseball. Because yeah, sure, maybe the Dodgers have an advantage because they have more money. It doesn't mean that another organization can do nothing, because we've seen a lot of organizations do nothing. Uh, most notably teams like the Rockies, the Pirates, the A's, the Tampa Bay Rays. I mean, there are countless, and the Orioles were one of them for a while. I mean, the biggest, still the biggest free agent signing in their history was Chris Davis. Um, and yes, it turned out to be one of the worst contracts ever signed, but still, like, I think as a franchise, you're like, outside of the Dodgers for right now because they just signed a $700 million free agent. But I think the largest contract you've ever given out as a franchise should change like twice or so a decade. right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the White Sox are a small market team, but you know what? They set a record with Yasmani Grandal before 2020. They set a record with Andrew Benintendi before 2023. Like they are, slowly raising their own stakes. The highest paid contract that an outside the organization free agent has ever gotten for the Pittsburgh Pirates was Russell Martin on a 2-year deal.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Right.
like, and that was over a decade ago now. Like, and the Orioles are a team that I think are going to start taking themselves a lot more seriously with this new ownership group. I mean, I absolutely don't think the Angelos family makes this trade. I think there's no way they make this trade. I don't think they're going to look at, because realistically, they're not even thinking about 2025 and beyond Corbin Burnes. They look at Corbin Burnes as a guy that is no longer eligible to be in the organization after 2024 once he hits free agency. And if that's the case, why would you trade two prospects, both of which could be starters in many organizations, maybe not this one because they are so loaded. But they made the trade because because of the new ownership group. And yeah, if they extend him, that's gonna wreck any narrative that any small market owner tries to have.
Yeah, that is the thing that has to follow suit in order for this narrative to be correct is if they extend Burnes, and I feel like that's likely. I'm not saying that it's definitely going to happen, but I feel like that's pretty likely because more often than not, if you're trading for a guy in the off season with only 1 year of control left, you're going to make a solid attempt to extend him. We saw that with Paul Goldschmidt. We saw that with Mookie Betts, although albeit with some COVID circumstances, which made Betts probably a little more privy to being extended. But nonetheless, with this, I think with ownership, um, it's a deal that not only the Angelos family wouldn't make if they were still in charge, but also like I'm sure that Mike Elias, the GM over there, is far more comfortable making this move because if the narrative does take place and the Baltimore is set to spend more in the future, now Mike Elias doesn't have to worry about like, oh, what if I have to find a new catcher in 5 years because Adley Rutschman is going to go in free agency, or same thing with Gunnar Henderson, or same thing with like Jackson Holiday down the line. So you don't have to keep stocking up prospect capital in case you have to let some guys go. Now, if you're able to keep some of these guys, you can let some of these prospects go, and you're absolutely fine doing it when you have the best farm system in baseball. And yeah, it's I think like the front office has been waiting for the right time to make some type of move like this, and it's definitely the right time. I mean, they're coming off a 101 win season. They seem to have more, possibly more financial flexibility now with the ownership change, and their biggest weakness probably was starting pitching, and they go out and get probably the best starting pitcher on at least the trade market, maybe even the trade and free agent market.
Do you know how much money the Orioles have committed to their 2025 roster as of right now?
Um, is it like sub 40 million?
It's $1 million. It is $1 million, and you know why it's $1 million? Because I guess they already simulated Felix Bautista's first year of arbitration. Because it's already listed that he's gonna receive $1 million in his ARB 1 year, which is not a common practice from what I've seen. So really, they haven't really committed a dime because Craig Kimbrell has a club option for 2025, not a guarantee that they take that. Danny Coulomb and CNL Perez also have club options for $4 and $2 million respectively. Who knows if they're going to pick those up? We won't know until the end of the season. And then James McCann is a free agent, and that's everyone they have on their team that is beyond their first free agency or their first like non-arbitration or pre-arb contract. They do have Corbin Burnes and Anthony Santander and John Means, who are all going to be free agents next offseason. But other than that, they basically haven't committed a dime other than Felix Bautista's $1 million in arbitration to the 2025 roster. So there's absolutely no reason not to go out and throw out some money for Corbin Burnes because, even if you give Adley Rutschman an extension right now, or you give Gunnar Henderson an extension right now, Grayson Rodriguez, Jackson Holiday, the big money isn't going to start to kick in for a few years because those are going to be deals where you sim arbitration, and it's going to be like one of those Braves deals where it's like You know, they signed Michael Harris to that deal where he's making, you know, I mean, it's going to be more than that, but you know, you could probably sign Adley Rutschman to an extension right now where his average annual value is less than $20 million a year because of the arbitration sim.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And yeah, I was just gonna get into that point is like, yeah, like that's why these contracts are so cheap. And yeah, like um and when you're considering 2025 and 2026, like the even when you consider arbitration and the dollars they're going to have to commit for arbitration and pre-arbitration, it's still not going to be much because Adley Rutschman's not going to be like second or third year arb, and Gunnar Henderson. Same thing with Gunnar Henderson. Same thing with Jackson Holiday and Grayson Rodriguez. They're all going to be either pre-arbitration or very early in their arbitration stages, which is where you just make substantially less money than you do like second year arbitration, third year arbitration, and then obviously after you hit free agency. So yeah, there's just a lot of financial flexibility for 2025 and 2026, and you'd hope for, you know, if this guy is a Baltimore fan, you hope for that sort of Steve Cohen transition, and it doesn't have to be $340 million. It could just be $140 million, and that would be a major upgrade to what they've had the past few years. So yeah, like there's so much potential already with how much prospect capital and how much talent they already have. But if they can add more to it, like they've just done, they're going to be unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, if Dave Rubenstein follows Orioles baseball and understands the state that their franchise is in, like he's got to be like licking his lips right now, looking at how much talent he's acquiring and how much potential he has right now in this moment to do. Yeah, because I mean, look at that. Like lock up Corbin Burnes right now. Give him 6, 7 years, right? What age season is he going into right now? He's going into okay, so he's going into age 29 season. So get him to like age 36 or 7, and that'll probably be, you know, your most expensive one right now. He's probably getting 25 to 30 mil a year, right? Get Adley for like 20 mil a year, Gunnar Henderson for the same thing, Jackson Holiday for even less, Grayson Rodriguez for probably even less. And it's like that still probably puts them as like a mid-tier payroll type team, and they just locked up 5 huge players for the next 7, 8 years.
Yeah, exactly. The future of your franchise there.
Yeah.
And yeah, this not. I'm not trying to make this a long point here, but it is an aside and it's kind of funny. And this isn't to discredit what the Orioles have done player development wise, because they have developed guys, you know, that they've drafted second round or later, but they really did beat the buzzer on the lottery pick, and they were where you could be rewarded for being the worst team for, you know,
They did.
4 years. So they were able to get, you know, Jackson Holiday #1, Adley Rutschman #1. Didn't they get Colton Cowser like top 5? Yeah.
I was gonna even go further into that point. You know, not yeah, yes, they did take advantage of having the guaranteed low draft picks with their poor performance, but also like they did the right things. I mean, Adley Rutschman, they drafted him #1 overall, right? And that was the no-brainer pick, right? Any team that was #1 that had the #1 pick would have drafted Adley Rutschman that year. So that's the one pick where you can kind of look at that and say like, okay, I could have made that pick, not a big deal. But then they draft Gunnar Henderson in the second round, right? Anyone could have had Gunnar Henderson. He ended up being a #1 prospect in the sport. He ended up being rookie of the year. We both had him as a top 3 third baseman after his rookie year. And then the next year was 2020, and who did they draft in 2020? Let me look that up.
Yeah, I forget.
That's the one year I forget because I can tell you the rest of them. All right, hang on a second. They draft Heston Kjerstad #2. Austin Martin was like the consensus #2 pick because we all knew Torkelson was going to go #1 overall that year. Austin Martin was supposed to be the #2. They draft Heston Kjerstad instead, who was supposed to be like not even a top 10 pick. Heston Kjerstad is a top 100 prospect. Austin Martin is no longer in the organization he was drafted in and is kind of irrelevant as a prospect right now. So like that was a non-consensus pick that worked out for them in 2020. In 2021, they take Colton Cowser #5. They could have taken Jordan Lawler, who was supposed to go right before him. They could have taken Kumar Rocker, very famously, he was supposed to go very early there. They end up with Colton Cowser, who was not supposed to be, again, like supposed to be like a fringe top 10 pick that year, if I remember correctly. And he's worked out better than a lot of the guys they absolutely could have drafted there. And then most importantly, 2022, the consensus number one pick going into that draft was Drew Jones, the right son of Andrew Jones. Everyone knew how good his dad was. Some say he's a Hall of Famer, and his son was supposed to be the number one pick in that draft, and they took Jackson Holliday instead. Jackson Holliday is the number one prospect in the sport. If you look at Drew Jones's stats in the minors so far, the Orioles made a wildly correct pick, and most teams would have taken Drew Jones there. So you got to give them credit because they've drafted extraordinarily well in that span where they had the low draft picks.
Yeah,
Like
100%.
impossibly well, even.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, that's talking about the high draft picks to discredit their player development, because along with picking correctly, like they've obviously had done a great part in developing these players, because back when the White Sox were making their front office changes over this past summer, we talked about the flip side of this, which is you get the high draft picks, you lose for a while, and you get rewarded with these high draft picks, and you either don't draft well or don't develop well, or both, which seemed to be the case with the White Sox, and you just kind of collapse within yourself very, very quickly. Whereas the Orioles, unless something crazy happens, are not going to do that. And the Orioles, like with what the White Sox drafted with like their 5 consecutive top 11 picks, none of those guys are, either projected to do as well or have done as well as these Orioles draft picks that they've acquired, and how successful they're projected to be or already have been, like with Rutschman and Henderson. So yeah, like, obviously nothing to discredit there. Along the thing with tanking is, along with losing, you also have to do the correct things after to project yourself for success, which is what the Astros have done, sort of what the Cubs did, but definitely what the Orioles are doing right now. But yeah, that's all an aside to the big acquisition with Corbin Burnes. Something I found pretty cool with Corbin Burnes and just the general Orioles rotation is you look at his numbers paired with Kyle Bradish's and Grayson Rodriguez's over the whole second half. It's pretty remarkable. In the second half of the 2023 season, out of 55 qualifiers in all of baseball, Kyle Bradish ranked second in ERA, Grayson Rodriguez ranked fifth in ERA, Corbin Burnes ranked ninth in ERA, and I'm sure FIP-wise, they were all pretty good as well. Grayson Rodriguez was third in FIP, Kyle Bradish was 10th, and Corbin Burnes was 13th out of 55. So in the second half last year, all three of those guys, whether it be on the Orioles or the Brewers, were absolutely fantastic. There are some things to look at long-term wise with Corbin Burnes where you're like, okay, what way is he trending? But he did have a very good second half last year, along with his resume before that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that rotation looks a lot prettier with him at the top. Bradish and Grayrod are already very fun, and now you put them into a position where there's a true ace above them that will mentor them and also put a lot less pressure on them to be those guys. And all of a sudden, that looks like a top 5 rotation in baseball with John Means, Dean Creamer, rounding out the 4 and 5. I do want to talk about one other note that I forgot from the the small market perspective. One of the other things that was involved in this trade was the 34th overall draft pick in 2024. Draft pick trading is allowed now, but it's only competitive balance picks and also rookie of the year picks. So if you are a top 10 market, or a bottom 10 market or a bottom 10 in revenue sharing market, you get a free draft pick at the end of the first round every year for competitive balance purposes. The fact that the Orioles are, in this position where it's possible that they might be extending Corbin Burnes while being a top or bottom 10 market and getting that draft pick, It's just kind of just another thing to show like the other small market owners, like, hey, you don't have to pretend to be poor because you are poor in relation to the Dodgers.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And the Padres have exemplified that since 2019.
Hmm.
And they're not making any aggressive moves right now, but that payroll is going to be very high for a while, and they seem to be okay with what they're doing there. And even if they cut payroll a little bit, they're still going to have a higher payroll than most other teams. And yeah, the Baltimore, yeah, like if they can go out and do this and maybe make some more free agent signings, yeah, it definitely like sort of flips that whole argument on its head and makes it look like, okay, maybe it's not maybe it's not that valid, and maybe owners are just using it as an excuse.
I think that one of the coolest things about it is that Baseball America like redid, or quote unquote redid their top 30 like organization farm systems after the trade. They're like, yeah, the Orioles are still number one by a long shot, by the way. Like you could just trade. I mean, I know DL Hall isn't a prospect anymore, but you could just trade a fringe 100 top 100 prospect and still be miles above everyone else. Like that's
Yeah,
how that's how good they are.
a guy
Um
who might be the best prospect in
I was gonna
some
say
other team.
well, I mean, Jackson Chorio is going to be the number one prospect in the Brewers system, obviously, but where does he? I'm very curious to know where Joey Ortiz ranks right now in the Brewers system.
You're right, right.
Okay, so real quick, this is all according to Baseball America. Um, DL Hall is still considered a prospect. They have him 93 in their rankings going into 2024. This is actually kind of funny because the Orioles are the number one farm system in baseball according to Baseball America. The Brewers are number two. And DL Hall is now the Brewers' number five prospect, and Joey Ortiz is probably going to be around like seven or eight, because number six is just behind DL Hall in the top 100. Ortiz is not there, and Ortiz was a couple spots behind DL Hall in the Orioles rankings before the trade. So, yeah, it was very funny. Baseball Reference or Baseball America came out with their top 30 farm systems literally the day after the trade, and said, yeah, the Orioles are still number one, and it's not even close.
Yeah, which is pretty extraordinary, and yeah, it's definitely a testament to
Shout
what.
out to uh, shout out to the defending World Series champions for also having the number three farm system because they have two top five guys.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's pretty sick.
If anyone's curious, rounding out the top 10, it's Orioles, Brewers, Rangers, Cubs, Tigers, Padres, Rays, Mets, Yankees, and Dodgers.
Right, right. Yeah. So, yeah, like obviously shout out to what Mike Elias and Sigmundal have built over there since
Mhm.
the start of the 2019 season, I believe, is when they came in and cleaned some things up over there. Um but yeah, and before we get into a couple more points about this trade, like uh going back to the point of what this means for the Orioles rotation is, like, I remember when the Orioles were down 2-0 in that series against Texas, and we went into that game. We came in on the podcast, and we were like, it's kind of unfortunate that they're going out and relying on Dean Creamer, and like, no complete disrespect to Dean Creamer, but he's not necessarily a guy you want in an elimination game like that. Whereas now, I don't know what the Orioles order will be if everyone's healthy at the end of the year, but it's going to be one of Burnes, Grayrod, or Kyle
Radish.
Bradish out in that game. So it provides so much more comfort for the Orioles, not only in the regular season but obviously the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, it is very weird that we look at a team that won over 100 games and had the most wins in their league and looked at them down 2-0 and thought, yeah, there's no chance they come back with this guy on the mound, right?
Yeah,
Like that is,
yeah,
it's weird that we were in that position a few months ago, but now, this trade is going to presumably dramatically change that image should that situation come up again next year.
yeah, 100%, 100%. Um, and
I
yeah,
wanted
like,
to,
yeah,
I wanted, I
there's a
did
lot more to get into here. Yeah,
I wanted to talk about this from the perspective of Corbin Burnes, particularly. He has already like spoken publicly about his reaction. He had a quote on Foul Territory where I think where he was like, Yeah, I was actually doing a bullpen when I found out last night. Let's say I added a couple miles an hour on the radar gun. So it seems like he's amped to be a part of this organization at this time, and how can you not be? But first of all, there's the statistical angle of it where you look at a guy like Corbin Burnes who has excellent strikeout to walk numbers, even if his strikeout rate was down last year. And you look at the fact that home runs have been uh, maybe his biggest issue, generally speaking, over the last couple of years. And then you look at that wall in Camden Yards and think, okay, uh, that's going to be that's going to make him even better, right? I mean, already a top 10 pitcher in the league or consensus. I don't think you had him in your top 10, but
He was,
uh,
yeah, he was very close, and I'm definitely in the minority.
that's fine. But going into it, most particularly, he gave up 25 home runs last year. Would have given up 18 if all of his games were pitched on Camden Yards. So that's those 7 home runs. That would make a huge difference in the public perception of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
An enormous difference.
And yeah, with him saying that, it makes a good bit of sense, like just from a human level, considering
Yep.
like, going from the Brewers to the Orioles, like not even that the Orioles are going to extend him, but thinking about it from his perspective, it was big news when he talked very, very openly about his frustration with his arbitration process with the Brewers. They had to go to a third party with that. And it just didn't go well, and it didn't sit well with him before that 2023 season.
Well, I can tell
And
you, if you remember correctly, do you remember what was said in that meeting?
um I forget.
They said the Brewers went to Corbin Burnes and said that he was the reason they missed the playoffs in 2022, and that's why they didn't want to give him the money that he felt like he was owed.
Right. So you go from that and not having really any serious extension talks with the Brewers, and whether or not the Orioles are going to extend him, they obviously want him. The Brewers didn't really show any signs of that in their arbitration process, nor their process with ever sort of talking about extending with him, unless there's some stuff that we don't know about. But he's going from an organization that told him that he was the reason that they missed the playoffs in 2022 to an organization that wanted to trade two top 100 MLB prospects for him. That for 1 year of him. So yeah, I think that definitely brings an attitude change just on a human level, ignoring, ERA, expected ERA, strikeout rate, walk rate, ignoring all that, just from a human level, it just brings more excitement to a guy like that.
Yeah, I mean, if here's what it looks like from the perspective of two complete outsiders like us. You have the Brewers, the team that, yes, drafted and developed Corbin Burnes, and a team that watched him succeed and helped him become the pitcher that he is today. Uh, but front office personnel that have looked at him and thought, we know our offense was awful last year, but you're the reason we didn't make the playoffs, even though you were pretty much the reason we were even in a position to make the playoffs. A team that presumably did not show any real interest in an extension. And then you look at the Orioles, and look, the Orioles could not come to the table with an extension. They could come to the table with the biggest slap in the face offer you've ever seen. But no matter what, Corbin Burnes is going to look at that and think, this team had these two assets they could have used to get anyone in baseball. Like, you could get a lot of things with DL Hall and Joey Ortiz. They could have gotten anything, and they chose 1 year of me. They chose 1 year to have me. They could have gotten a guy with control. They could have gotten someone they perceived was better. They picked 1 year of me. They want me, right?
And this is the biggest thing they've done in a very long time.
Yes, and they not only that, but they also completely stepped out of what has been their comfort zone for like 30 years. Did something that nobody thought they would do. Yeah, broke character because they wanted to have me.
Yeah. It's not like the Yankees or Dodgers or Mets where seems to be common practice. This is the Orioles, who are known for being low budget, not being aggressive in the market, and for whatever reason, whether that be ownership, front office, whatever. And yeah, it really does bring. Yeah, if I'm Corbin Burnes, I'm wicked pumped as well. Sorry to drop that. I'm not even from Massachusetts, but did drop a wicked right there. But yeah, and yeah, from a Brewers perspective, yeah, let's talk about it from a Brewers perspective. They're an interesting organization because they did just sign Reese Hoskins and seem to be buying in that aspect, but they're just an interesting organization because it seems like they're always sort of retooling and not necessarily going in either direction.
Here's my thought with the Brewers. We talked last week about, yeah, they signed Reese Hoskins. I said that I had my original prediction was that I was going to have Reese Hoskins going to the Brewers, but I ended up declining it because I thought they would be in full sell mode, but then they weren't, and now they are. Now that they've traded Corbin Burnes, like, why not just keep going? And the first person I'm looking at is a guy that we'll be talking about later in this show, in Devin Williams. Devin Williams has this year, and then he has what is it, a $10 million player option or a club option. So, and I mean, if he performs the same way in 2024 that he did in 2023, he's got 2 years, because I think that $10 million option will absolutely be taken. So, for all intents and purposes, you have 2 years left of Devin Williams. How can you not trade him, right? Your bullpen is still going to be very strong without him, with guys like Abner Uribe, with guys like what is Hobie Milner still in that bullpen?
I believe
He
so.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. Joel Payamps was very good last year. Like, the Brewers bullpen would still objectively look pretty good without Devin Williams. How can you not trade him if this is what you're gonna do? Because, trading Corbin Burnes doesn't really indicate they're trying to win this year. And I know that, and like, the Brewers have also had such a huge next man up type of, uh, you know, like, vibe with their bullpen, right? Like, they trade Josh Hader, for what has turned out to be really not that much. I mean, I guess they got William Contreras out of the guy they traded for Hader, or they got for Hader, but why? How can you not trade Devin Williams at this point, right?
Yeah, yeah, it would make a good bit of sense. I'm wondering what the dialogue is within that front office because yeah, like I said, they never really seem to be going in either direction. I've never really thought about the Brewers ever being in win now mode, or except for maybe late 2010s ish, in 18 or 19, but even then it wasn't a complete full go, and I don't remember ever them like going full rebuild mode either. So yeah, I think they just kind of look at each individual player as a case by case basis of like, okay, what are the pros and cons? Like, are we better off with these two prospects or this player for one more year? So I'm sure they're having that conversation about Devin Williams, who is arguably, and we'll get to it. We'll declare it later this episode, but arguably the best reliever in baseball. So I'm wondering, like, okay, have they reached out to teams who, or do they have an idea of what they could get out of it, and is that worth getting rid of, potentially the best reliever in baseball for this year? So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of weird math that goes into it, but yeah, it's just interesting because like they never really seem to be going full go in either direction.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's so weird because, like, only the Brewers have been in the news the last few weeks, right? They extended Jackson Chorio for an 8-year contract. They simmed his. I mean, look at that. Jackson Chorio, going back to an earlier point, Jackson Chorio is basically at the same like, valuability. That's definitely not the word. He's definitely at the same value as Jackson Holiday, right? They're both very young. They're both top two prospects in the game. They're both uh going to presumably debut this year. And Jackson Chorio took 8 years and 82 million.
Yeah,
Like, the Orioles could go to Jackson Holiday, be, hey, 8 years, 90 million.
yeah, 100%, 100%.
But anyway, yeah, it's been such a weird offseason because, like, they're in on, going for Jackson Chorio. They're in with Reese Hoskins, out with Corbin Burnes. It's kind of hard to, like, I understand that they were just never going to re-sign Corbin Burnes to begin with. Um, but I don't know. Like, I wonder if the Christian Yelich contract has, like, completely scarred them to the point where they're terrified to sign anyone, because Christian Yelich looked like such a safe bet in that contract back in 2019, right? Or before, was it before 2019 or before 2020? It was before 2020, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And it hasn't panned out, not even close. I mean, he's still owed another 26 mil a year for the next 5 seasons,
Yeah.
which like
Yeah.
that's not good.
Yeah. And yeah, that I mean that's a guy who's coming off back to back, back to back MVP finalist seasons, and arguably should have won it in
Could have
2019 as well.
very much could have been back-to-back MVP seasons.
Yeah, back to back, and that's back to back 1,000 OPS seasons. Stole 30 bases that 2019 year. Like, yeah, it's a very good way to phrase it. Is definitely a safe bet. So yeah, and yeah, it definitely. Yeah, I see why an organization with maybe a lower budget why they might hesitate, but yeah, it's interesting. Like trying to figure out the Brewers is very very difficult. But yeah, it's all stuff that probably gets talked about behind closed doors. Anything more about this? Anything more about the Burnes trade?
I feel like that covers all of it. I mean, it's a definitely a very big shakeup in the league, with Baltimore like now very much in the picture. I mean, they already were before, but uh, I mean, this team is like, they're a World Series contender, right? I
Yeah,
mean, at
it's
this point, it feels like not World Series or bust yet, but I mean, that's definitely a step that they're trying to take.
yeah. If the Orioles new ownership goes like completely goes for it, um, at like it's like those hypothetical scenarios where people talk about like, oh, what if hornets were the size of humans? Like
Yeah.
it would be crazy. Like what if this great team had a normal MLB budget? Like that is a very very
It'll be
scary
kind of
thing.
like the reverse of like what people have thought of like or it'll, you know what it'll be the hypotheticals people have talked about with the Rays for so long, where it's like the Rays have this great player development system. They roll out these incredible relief pitchers, and everyone just out of nowhere every year. Imagine if they spent some money. That could be what we see from the Orioles in the next like 5 years, and we could see what that looks like.
100, yeah, 100%. Like
And also it doesn't have this stigma attached to it that the Dodgers have, where it's like, oh well, it's LA, it's a massive market, of course they're gonna do that. If it comes from Baltimore, like every team, every fan base should be looking at their team and be like, what are we doing here? How is this not the way we're running our organization?
yeah, it would be unquestionably fantastic for the sport of baseball
Yeah.
if they did this. As a Red Sox fan,
It
um,
would either be great for the sport of baseball, or it would expose so many owners
yeah,
that could operate this way but choose not to, and choose to, uh treat Major League Baseball like, a source of profit, because that is, at the end of the day, that's what this sport is. It is it is the most profitable sport to own a team in, right? You're exempt from antitrust laws. You have massive TV deals that broadcast 162 games a year. You get 81 games for fans to show up to every year. It's the most profitable sport to own a team in, bar none. And
yeah,
some people see it as nothing more than that.
yeah, and whether or not it makes owners spend more or it exposes owners, I think it will be great for baseball
Yeah, absolutely.
because yeah, like having owners sort of be exposed and you know left with their I don't know what the right verbiage is, but just left out to dry like that, it would do a lot for just the narrative of general baseball fans and whatnot. But yeah, great news for Baltimore. The Red Sox fan in me is a little bit scared, but whatever, we can put that aside for now. But yeah, so good news from the old Inner Harbor. A brief bit of news, not nearly as impactful,
No.
um, but interesting nonetheless, is coming out of Seattle, where Seattle acquired Jorge Polanco. Um, I just found it interesting because he does have some pretty good offensive numbers. But what did you think about this move when it happened?
The thing that I know about Jorge Polanco as a hitter is that he absolutely refuses to hit ground balls, which I love. Uh, I think something that is kind of exciting for me is that the fact that he's, from a power perspective, moving away from Minnesota, right? They have a pretty large right field wall out there. Seattle doesn't quite exactly have that. Yeah, he had a 29% ground ball rate last year, and a 30%, 33% from 2023 through 21. A 39% fly ball rate last year in how many plate appearances? 343. Um, and does he pull the ball a lot? He absolutely does, 41.9%. Something that I've said about a few hitters this offseason, in terms of like Isak Paredes types, Lane Thomas types, is, if you hit the ball in the air enough and you pull it enough, and you have like not an awful exit velocity, you'll find your way into a good amount of home runs. And I feel like that's what we could see out of Jorge Polanco in Seattle. He would have hit 14 home runs last year if he played all of his games in Minnesota, and he would have hit 17 in Seattle. So, it'll be a ballpark upgrade for his play style. If he can stay healthy, he's probably a guy that could put up some pretty good count stats. We could see 25 homers out of him, which would be a big upgrade at the second base position from what the Mariners are used to over the last few years with Colton Wong, with Jose Caballero, with Adam Frazier.
But yeah. So yeah, and something you may have just mentioned is like the Seattle has had sort of a hole at second base for a while, pretty much since they traded Robinson Cano. And to dive more into that, since 2019, which is the year that they traded Robinson Cano, the Mariners have the fourth lowest weighted runs created plus at second base with an 80 weighted runs created plus, which means their second baseman on average for the last 5 years have been 20% below average at the plate. And then overall production wise, they have the seventh lowest FWAR at the position. So they tried to fill that gap with Colton Wong, but unfortunately he had by far the worst year of his career for whatever reason. But Jorge Polanco is looking to right that wrong, and I'm pretty interested in what he can bring to the table, because overall offensive production wise, 751 OPS last year, or in 2022, excuse me, 789 OPS in 2023, both above average seasons, which is pretty key out of the second base position. Expected numbers wise, 76th percentile in expected WOBA and 82nd percentile in expected slugging, which is very, very good. 94th percentile sweet spot rate. And I think injuries have made him not produce as much, obviously, but on a game per game basis, he's been very productive. And in fact, I wanted to kind of compare him to someone who gets a lot of praise at the second base position. But per 650 plate appearances, someone like Luis Arraez has 3.5 FWAR per 650 plate appearances. Jorge Polanco's at 2.7. So, what happened here? Were you hearing me that whole time? I just paused. Okay.
Yeah, I heard you.
I'll just restart that point.
Okay.
Looking at Luis Arraez, who gets a lot of praise at the second base position. Over the last 2 seasons, he has 3.5 FWAR per 650 plate appearances, which is, basically a full season. Jorge Polanco is at 2.7. So less than a win above replacement difference per year over the last 2 years. On a game per game basis. It's just staying on the field, and if he can stay on the field, he can be a pretty productive player at the second base position. So yeah, it's he's not gonna change he's not gonna be the reason that they get into the playoffs most likely, but he is just a positive contribution to the team in general, which they could use after some of the lineup pieces they lost this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely, they could. Just because it was brought up, can we talk about the Robinson Cano trade and just how wild that was 5 years later? Just very briefly. It doesn't have to be a segment.
Yeah, no, we can get into it.
Sometimes I think about Brody Van Wagenen trading for his former client. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in case you don't know, between the 2018 to 19 season, the New York Mets and Seattle Mariners made a trade that sent Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz to the Mariners for Justin Dunn, Jared Kelenic, among others. And the big story was that Brody Van Wagenen had just become the general manager of the Mets, and uh he was a former client of Brody Van Wagenen, or Robinson Cano was a former client of Brody Van Wagenen, uh, and basically, oh, I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, I have the story right, correct? Robinson Cano was one of Brody Van Wagenen's clients. Okay, yeah, Brody. Yeah, do have this right. Uh, Brody Van Wagenen was the leader of Creative Agents Agency, which is which was one of the large agencies in baseball once upon a time, and one of his major clients was Robinson Cano, and then he traded for him.
Yeah, that whole the name Brody Van Wagenen is sort of a throwback. It just brings me back to high school because of like
Yeah.
and
Yep.
considering all the turnover that the Mets have had in the front office, like it seems like that was 15 years ago, but no, it was it was about half a decade ago, which is pretty crazy to think about.
Yeah. Like they've got how many GMs have they gone through since? Because they had, well, I mean, first of all, like the crazy thing about that hire was because they hired a former agent, which is like an unheard of thing. And then they went through well, because yeah, they've hired so many guys since, right? They had Jared Porter for about 1 month, who pulled off one of the best trades in franchise history and then left.
Yeah.
If people remember that. And they had Zach Scott, who got a DUI coming home from like an office party or something like that. And they've hired David Stern since, and they've hired Billy Epler since. They have them both working in the front office right now. But yeah, there's been so many like big front office hirings within the
And then
Mets
yeah, like
since Sandy Alderson.
and even not including GMs like Carlos Beltran was
Yup.
hired and fired very quickly, and then Luis Rojas, Buck Showalter, and I forget the guy
Mickey
who they have now.
Callaway. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Mickey
Well, Mickey
Callaway.
Callaway was before. Yeah, but no, they had it's funny because they had Sandy Alderson and Terry Collins for so long. And after that, it's been like the Patriots like quarterback since Tom Brady,
Yes, yeah, like
where it's just been such a carousel of
yeah,
after like a mainstay.
right, exactly, and then yeah, and then the ownership group also changed, so like
Yeah, and then the ownership group changed.
so yeah, it's been almost a toxic it's been a very up and down thing with the Mets as of late, but they seem to be in a good spot now with David Stearns in charge um and just going forward from there. So hopefully that there's a little bit of sustainability there. But yeah, that is a throwback to think about Brody Van Wagenen.
Brody Van Wagenen.
Quite the interesting
Yeah.
things going
Crazy
on.
because the Mets like objectively won that trade too.
Yeah, especially considering like Jared Kelenic is now with the Braves.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
What
sure.
was the full trade?
Um, yeah, I forget.
Because there are definitely guys that I'm missing. The two that I remember were Justin Dunn. It was, yeah, okay. It was wow, there was a lot more names than I remember. It was Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz going to the Mets for Jay Bruce, Anthony Swarzak, Gershon Batista, Jared Kelenic, Justin Dunn. So
Yeah,
I got two of the five, but I got kind of the major two because I don't think Gershon Batista made it to the majors. Anthony Swarzak was kind of just a journeyman reliever, and then also Jay Bruce.
I do remember the Jay Bruce Mariners era.
Yeah, I do too.
That was pretty fun. Shout out Jay Bruce. But yeah, so yeah, anything more before we get into positional rankings?
I do think that's it.
Yeah, pretty fantastic. So yeah, we will be getting into Robinson Cano's position that he dominated for a while. Maybe if we had our positional rankings back in if we started the show in the mid
like
2010s he'd be
2013.
on there. But 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 yeah, so there's a second base interesting class this year, a major addition to it with Mookie
Wait,
Betts.
are we doing relief pitcher or second base first?
Um
I thought relief pitcher was first on the list.
oh yeah,
It was.
okay, yeah, we'll do relief pitchers first. Okay, I'll redo that.
Yeah, you're good.
Um so yeah, now into positional rankings where we will start with relief pitchers, which was very, very interesting to do because like there's a lot of options to put there. There's the variance that you have with like having 7 to 8 relievers on each team, whereas like, we're doing second base here, there's not 7 or 8 second basemen on each team. Then along with that, like there's a closer on each team, and also like when we're talking about guys over their last 2 seasons, maybe they've thrown 120 innings, which is just not that much. So there's just a lot that can change on a year-to-year basis. So it's kind of hard to make these rankings, but it should be interesting to talk about them. But yeah, anything more before we get into your number 10 here?
No, I don't think so. One thing that I feel like everyone did, like part of the development of like becoming a baseball fan and learning the statistics and like all the ins and outs of the game is like think like viewing relievers and closers as two different positions. Did you
Yeah,
experience that?
yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just an anecdote.
Yeah, like I did have such a higher growing up, I did have such a higher like um appraisal for the closer as opposed to the guy who pitched the seventh and eighth inning.
Yeah, because I played fantasy baseball starting in 2013, and like one of the things you got points for was saves. So of course it's like, well, I got to get the guy with the most saves, which is
Right.
it's kind of like taking a kicker in fantasy football, where it's like which guy's gonna have a lot of opportunities to either kick field goals or kick extra points or convert saves because they're on a good team with a good offense.
Yeah, and then if you actually look at it on a rate basis, it's like, oh, it's actually completely different than what I thought it was.
Yep.
It is very, yeah, it is funny. Like I don't I didn't even think about like how many closers I have and how many like pre ninth inning guys I have, um but yeah, there's a mix of both for sure.
I would imagine I have. Oh yeah, I mean I have. There's one team I believe with multiple guys, so I mean definitely.
Right, right.
Although I do think this is mostly closers. I think there's 9 closers on this list.
Yeah, I got definitely 8.
Okay.
Um yeah, I think so. But
I had a
yeah.
lot of honorable mentions. I think my initial list was 17,
Yeah, I
which
have
is the
I have 5
largest
honorable
one,
mentions.
which is the largest one that I've had. And I had to find a way to cut 7 of them, which was really difficult. I'll go through them after we're done, but yeah, this was a very difficult list for me to make. Am I going first?
Yeah, who was your number
All
10?
right, at number 10, starting this off, I have Camilo Doval of the San Francisco Giants. Camilo Doval has been kind of a dominant reliever ever since he came up midway through 2021. Last year, he put up his third consecutive season with an expected ERA below 3. He's done that every year since he's been in the majors. He also had a 52% ground ball rate and a fly ball and line drive rate, both at 20%. I like to see both of those at a very low rate. One of the things that he did this year was really develop his slider. His slider has been very good ever since he's gotten into the league, but this year in particular, he threw his slider 412 times, and he did throw it more to lefties than to righties, which is interesting because I feel like as a right-handed pitcher, you're usually throwing your slider more to righties because it moves out towards them and into lefties. But he did throw it 263 times to lefties and 149 times to righties. And he had a 49.3% whiff rate on his slider, which was fourth highest among the 99 pitchers with 200 swings against their slider in 2023. Camilo Doval has been, I mean, he's been obviously an excellent pitcher. He does get hit a little hard, but it's also mostly on the ground. He just walked some guys, and I don't know. I feel like it's very difficult to justify why I have 9 guys above him. You know, I mean, I still think Camilo Duvall is super talented. I mean, it took a lot for him to make this list. Yeah, I have him at number 10.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like there's so many like really really good pitchers that have to be left off this list with like really good numbers, that like guys who have like sub 3 ERAs over the last 2 years that have to be left off. And just to correct myself from earlier, I think I have 7 closers on here, because my number 10 I don't believe is going to be a closer. And this is, I don't know if it's a wild card pick, but it's a guy who like hasn't probably thrown as many innings as some of the other guys on this list, but I'm talking about Jose Alvarado of the Philadelphia Phillies. Just numbers wise, what he's been doing over the past 2 years has been pretty exceptional, especially peripherally. Among relievers with 90 innings over the last 2 years, he has the lowest FIP at 2.14. He also has the 4th highest strikeout rate and 4th highest strikeout minus walk rate. So those are things that just translate. Having the lowest FIP is likely going to translate, and having the highest strikeout rate and or not the highest strikeout rate, but one of the highest strikeout rates and one of the highest strikeout minus walk rates is something that typically translates. So that's something I'm excited with. However many innings he's going to pitch, I'm not sure. But with relievers, it's so hard to talk about whether they're going to be healthy or not, because some guys are just tapped out for a full year because of how hard they throw. But sometimes guys will surprise you and throw like 70 innings one year. So you really never know or can rely upon a guy throwing that many innings. So that's why I'm putting a guy with not as many innings over the past years, and just has really, really good like inning per inning numbers. So Jose Alvarado gets the 10 spot for me. And now your number 9.
Phillips from the Dodgers. He put up a 1.14 ERA in 2022 in 63 innings pitched. He threw just about the same amount of innings last year and put up a 2.05 ERA. So, I mean, that success has been sustained. Every single one of his percentile circles is above the 59th percentile, or 59th percentile or above, I should say. So, I mean, he's obviously very good at everything. But his best pitch, his crown jewel, has to be his sweeper. It's the most commonly used pitch out of his arsenal. And also one very important thing to note, he's not afraid to throw it to either lefties or righties. Threw it 284 times to righties, 132 times to lefties. So maybe a little disproportionately more to righties, but regardless, he threw it every time he needed to. And his sweeper had a 111 batting average against last year. That was the second lowest, only to Sonny Gray. Minimum 300 sweepers thrown. His slugging percentage against of 194 was also second to Sonny Gray. So I mean, that's when you're primary. I mean, first of all, there's not a lot of guys that have a sweeper as their primary pitch, and to be able to have one, not be afraid to throw it to anyone, and have it have that much success is already tremendous. One thing that I kind of just love about Evan Phillips is that he threw 220 cutters, and exactly one was to a righty, and the other 219 were to lefties, which I kind of just found amusing. Wasn't actually his best pitch, didn't get the best results, but regardless, I kind of enjoyed that. Yeah, I mean, he has a good 4-pitch arsenal. He doesn't throw his 4-seamer or his sinker a whole lot. It's about 19 and 11%, but he did get good results out of each of those last year. And yes, I mean, sweeper at 45.5% and having it have the stats that he got is just tremendous. So I put Evan Phillips in my 9 spot.
Yeah, that cutter thing is pretty funny, because I feel like with a pitch with glove side movement like that, you'd want to throw it to righties. But yeah,
It's interesting. I actually looked it up, and it's pretty even, believe it or not, from righties.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's pretty interesting. So yeah, on to my number 9. Shout out friend of the program, although there's no recorded evidence of it, but a nice Canadian fellow, Matt Brash, who has been dominant, at least peripherally, since he became a reliever. And a lot of my rankings are just what I think they will. These are rankings of what we think they're going to do in 2024. And I think a lot of my picks are guys where maybe I don't think they've been top 10 relievers in the game these past few years, but I think they're going to make their mark in 2024. And Matt Brash is one of those guys for me. He since becoming a reliever, so he started 2022 as a starter, struggled a little bit, had some control issues, went down to the minors and became a reliever. And ever since becoming a reliever, he's been an extremely good pitcher. He has a 2.84 ERA and 2.18 FIP as a reliever in his career. And among relievers with 100 plus innings over the last 2 seasons, he has the lowest FIP as a reliever. And he's also just coming off a year with a 25% strikeout minus walk rate and a sub 5% barrel rate. So, with his strikeout minus walk rate being as elite as it is, and him not allowing hard fly balls the way he is, that's just going to translate, especially in T-Mobile Park, pitcher friendly park. I really love the potential future of him. And also he was a major innings eater as a reliever, through over 70 innings last year. So lots of things to be happy about with Matt Brash's performance. And I think that's going to continue in the next season. Who do you have as your number 8?
Yeah, my number 8, I have a different Seattle Mariner. I have Andres Munoz in my 8. Unfortunately, he spent some time on the injured list last year and only threw 49 innings compared to 65 last year. That's like a month and a half's work of innings that he missed out on. But there are some things he did last year that I really liked, even compared to his 2022, which was objectively his better season. He had a lower ERA, better strikeout numbers. But anyway, he had a 59% ground ball rate last year and a 13.7% fly ball rate. His fly ball rate went down over 10%, and his ground ball rate went up by 6.5%. So, he did a lot of excellent things with his batted ball profile this year. He actually started throwing a sinker, pretty much a lot more. He only threw it how many times in 2022? He threw 2 sinkers in 2022, and he threw it 19% of the time in 2023. And he got kind of the most insane results on it, by the way. A negative 22 average launch angle on his sinker, which is like you're supposed to do that on sinkers, but he went even beyond that. So to add that to his already insane arsenal with a filthy slider and a fastball that averages 99 miles an hour with like average extension is pretty remarkable. I would love to see what he does in a full year, but I mean, he's already, I think he already has one of the best profiles in terms of like stuff in general. And he actually also has pretty decent control. I mean, it definitely got a lot worse last year, but a 6% walk rate in 2022, obviously a strikeout rate well above 30%. And yeah, I would love to see if he can continue to throw that sinker, keep it in his arsenal, and then see if there's a good healthy mix between the three, and then some more volume.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much potential with him. Averages over 99 on his fastball, which is pretty remarkable. Speaking of, most of these guys are hard throwers, but speaking of another hard throwing guy with like 100th percentile fastball velocity, my number 8 is Yohan Duran. He's interesting to evaluate because FIP numbers went down, or FIP numbers went up, which is bad last year, but also like he just has he's just had a good track record since he's become like a good consistent reliever. And in the last 2 years, and it just makes a lot of sense considering his rankings, why I put him number 8, because in the last 2 years, among relievers with 100 plus innings pitched, he ranks 8th in ERA, 8th in strikeout rate, and 8th in strikeout minus walk rate. So yeah, I put him number 8. Also, expected numbers wise, he's also pretty elite. Out of 134 relievers with 1,500 plus pitches thrown in the last 2 seasons, he has the 6th lowest expected slugging and 5th lowest expected WOBA. He's pretty tremendous at getting ground balls along with strikeouts as well. So yeah, there's some cool things about Yohan Duran. I think some people would put him top 5. I'm a little bit hesitant, but I definitely see a case for him. There's so much variance with this list in general, and I think we're going to see that as we go along. But who's your number 7?
Number 7, a guy that kind of surprised me a lot. You know, I knew that he was very good and I expected to have him on this list, but I was not ready to be that impressed by David Bednar, who I put in my 7 from the Pittsburgh Pirates. You know, first of all, the Savant page obviously jumps out at you. 95th percentile expected ERA at 284, 95th percentile in expected batting average below 200. He actually throws 90, he averages 96 miles per hour with 6.7 feet of extension, so the perceived velocity is better. He has a very good barrel rate, but most notably, a 96th percentile chase rate and an 89th percentile whiff rate. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of things he's very good at. He's good at getting swing and miss, good at striking guys out, and also his walk numbers in like the first half of last year were like insane. I think he walked like 2 guys in like April and May combined or something like that. And it did balance itself out a little more throughout the season, but I want to get that exact number because it was like ridiculous. From March 30th through June 23rd, David Bednar walked a grand total of one person. Of one person allowed one home run. He had a 161 ERA and a 140 FIP. And it did, you know, he did lose a little bit of command, but I mean that's also an insanely high bar. It's not even fair to compare. But the thing that really stuck out to me about David Bednar, which I haven't talked about, was I noticed he gave up 3 home runs last season in 67 and a third innings pitched and had a 30% fly ball rate, 30.1% to be exact. And I was like, okay, how can that be? How do you allow so many fly balls, but only 3 leave the park? And I looked into it, and for one, 44% of his fly balls given up were straight away. And obviously, that's the most difficult place to hit a home run in a ballpark, center field, you know, kind of goes anywhere. But the biggest thing was that on his pulled and straight away fly balls, the average exit velocity was 87 miles an hour, which was, I believe, the third lowest minimum 50 fly balls allowed. So, you know, even with David Bednar having a bit of an erratic batted ball profile, the soft contact he gives up is so key, and it gives him. I mean, that's why the expected batting average is so low, right? Because you're giving up so many weak fly balls that aren't getting out at any part of the ballpark. David Bednar did an extraordinary job at that last year, and then for that reason and for many others, he's my number 7.
Yeah. Good. Solid analysis right there. My number 7 is a guy who's really only had one really good season, but with how great it was last year, I had to give him some top 10 love. He's someone I put as the how about that last year, one of my reliever diving. I'm talking about Tanner Scott of the Miami Marlins. He had an unreal transformation last year, led all relievers in FWAR last year. That is pretty remarkable. He had the second best FIP out of relievers with 50 plus innings pitched, and he was 96 percentile or higher in barrel rate, hard hit rate, average exit velocity, strikeout rate, whiff rate, chase rate, and expected ERA. All those major categories, he was 96 percentile or better in. At most, 4% of the league was better than him in those categories, which is pretty remarkable, which is why even after just one season, I have to have him top 10. He sort of had his own, shout out to you with Robbie Ray, but he had his own like Robbie Ray transformation.
He did.
Where he kind of like much of his pitching style or pitching ability was around the same except for his walk rate. He cut his walk rate by more than half last year. He went from almost 16% to below 8%, which was pretty remarkable. And that's the difference between him being an average reliever and an elite reliever. So if he keeps that up, he's definitely a top 10 pitcher, and or a top 10 reliever, and I'm relying on him to keep that up. So shout out to Tanner Scott at number 7. Who do you have as your number 6?
Yeah, number 6. This is where I put one of the bigger names, certainly among relievers, a guy that we talked about recently. This is where I put Josh Hader, believe it or not. It took a lot for me to keep him out of the top 5, but I feel like for sustainability, I did try to look at the last 2 years for relievers. And not always, but I mean, Josh Hader was particularly concerning in 2022. I mean, his expected numbers were a lot better, but he had a 5.22 ERA. His home run rate ballooned that year. And guys were kind of just hitting him a lot harder, generally speaking. So I ended up leaving him out of the top 5, despite being one of the best, maybe the best. I mean, there's a case for him at number 1, to be completely honest. A lot of what really concerns me is uh, the fact that he's going to be pitching in Houston now. And I think we talked about this last week, but he's a guy that, despite being a sinker baller, gives up a lot of fly balls. He did do a good job of keeping guys from pulling the fly balls this year. But if that does come back to hurt him, it's going to be really bad for him with these short right field and the Crawford boxes in left. And also just kind of sneak peeking it. He gave up 3 home runs last year, and he would have given up 6 in Houston. So I did leave him out of the top 5 because I am a little skeptical of what he's going to look like in Houston, and also the 2022 is still kind of a haunting thing for me. But I did put him at 6. But I mean, again, you still can't deny, even with all of that concern, you still can't deny his talent and his ability to strike guys out. His ability last year to allow soft contact, he did a much better job of that this year. His extension, giving him more perceived velocity. His breaking stuff, his slider as well. You can't deny it.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, like to add more to the talk, we talked for like 10 minutes about his sinker, I think a couple weeks ago, and it was a fun conversation because I was very interested in it. Also, like one bit note of research that I did on my own was when he throws his sinker in the lower third of the strike zone in his career, the slugging against is like 450 something, and when it's in the upper third, it's like 30 something, which it's almost reverse of what usually happens. But usually when you throw sinkers up in the zone, it's worse for you. But with Josh Hader, it seems to be better with him. But yeah, going to Houston, yeah, I did see those like home run numbers by ballpark numbers, and those did pop in my mind for sure, and they definitely were in consideration for me. With my number 6, this is another guy similar to Hader, like sort of a legacy guy, or at least has been over the past few years. But with this guy, his performance dropped a little bit last year, but was still very good, but not with the elite of some of the guys I have above him. But I'm talking about Emmanuel Clase. Granted, he did lead in saves, but still, we have to talk about more than that. With Emmanuel Clase, in terms of the longer term, he's the leader among relievers in F4 over the last 2 years. But breaking it down to last year, he did have some alarming drops in strikeout rate and ground ball rate, which is kind of his bread and butter. He was very good at striking batters out, and he was very good at getting the ball on the ground. And as part of a result of him giving up less ground balls, more line drives, more fly balls, that resulted in increases in average exit velocity and barrel rate. And that's part of why his ERA more than doubled. His ERA went from 1.36, I believe, to 3.22, which is, takes you from number 1 to number 6 for me, because I probably would have had him top 2 heading into last year. But because of those drops in strikeout rate and ground ball rate, increases in barrel rate and average exit velocity, and his ERA going up so high, even if it was good, I kind of have to take him out of the top 5 for that reason. Who do you have as your number 5?
So at number 5, this is where I put a guy you previously mentioned, an ARR alum, friend of the program. This is where I put Matt Brash of Team Canada and also of the Seattle Mariners. He has, I believe, a 218 FIP ever since he became a reliever, and 0.27 home runs per 9. Walk numbers are a little up there, but he's still only going into his age 26 season, his 3rd full season in the majors. So, I have faith that he has time to figure out the walks. And even then, his walk rate was still 34th percentile, which is not that bad considering a K rate in the 98th percentile and a whiff rate in the 98th percentile. So he certainly makes up for it. Earlier I mentioned with David Bednar how he had a very low exit velocity on his pulled and his opposite field fly balls. Matt Brash was the lowest on that list at 84 miles per hour on his pulled and opposite field fly balls. He had Also 3 home runs allowed last year, also a 30.1% fly ball rate and 70.2 innings pitched. And he had very similar analysis to David Bednar, except this time he comes with one of the best sliders, certainly one of the best looking sliders in all of baseball. It had a 48.5% whiff rate last year, a 30.5% put away rate. Having a 30.5% put away rate on your best pitch, or on your primary pitch, I should say, is kind of insane. He almost had more strikeouts than he did batted balls against his slider, 71 strikeouts to 79 batted balls, which is absurd to have over a full season. He does need a little bit of work on his secondary pitches. His fastball and curveball, cutter and sinker did not produce the greatest stats last year. I mean, he did get, a good number of whiffs, healthy number of whiffs on all of them, but when hit in play, they were But I mean, you can't deny how ridiculous his slider is and how much one pitch is able to carry his entire arsenal. He's another guy that's not afraid to throw it to anyone. He threw it 369 times to righties, 290 times to lefties. So not even really like disproportionate to one side. Looks pretty even to me. A good healthy mix of pulled straightaway and opposite field. Pretty even on all fronts there. But yeah, I have Matt Brash in my 5 because I think there's still improvements he can make, and I believe he absolutely should and will make. That will make him even better. So I have him in my 5.
Yeah, for sure. And just visually watching that slider, it's like, whoa.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen it in person.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
it's special.
It's like, is that even real? Is this AI? Who's
Yeah.
doing this? Yeah, but we kind of flip-flopped on Seattle relievers. And I understand why you put Brash ahead of this guy, but I'm talking about Andres Munoz is my number 5. Part of this is like, this might be my most like vibey pick, like sort of just feeling out the energy, feeling what the world is giving me, the energy that the world is giving me, and thinking what's going to happen for 2024. And I think part of me putting Munoz at number 5, despite some drop in performance last year, is just like I'm still so amazed with what he was able to do in 2022. He had an expected ERA of 1.84 that year. That just doesn't happen. It's pretty exceptional, and he was so great at preventing hard contact, along with getting a high whiff rate. Even last year, he had a 39% whiff rate. That's insane. It's absolutely insane. So, I think I'm just thinking that he's going to track back more to that 2022 self, because I think he's heading into his age 25 season. But yeah, there are some things like looking at last year, why he may have dropped down some guys' lists or just fallen out of the list completely, because I think his strikeout rate dropped. His ERA increased and his expected ERA increased by more than a full run. So what I'm going with here is thinking about what he was able to do in 2022 and thinking that, with his stuff, with that amazing slider and with that high velocity fastball, he's going to be able to be a top 5 reliever again. So yeah, it's just kind of more of a feeling the energy out with Andres Munoz, and we've seen how great he is, and was still very good last year. He didn't really fall off a crazy amount, although a little bit incrementally.
If we did this list last year, I probably would have had him in like the 3 or 4, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Because he was that good. In my number 4, I took another guy that you mentioned earlier. I took Johan Duran. I refuse to believe anyone hits well off this guy. Like, he had one of the higher home run rates among people that are on this list for us. He gave up 6 home runs last year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is for a reliever, especially a reliever with a 15% fly ball rate. Every time I see a guy hit a home off him or like make hard contact, I'm like, no, they had to have gotten lucky. Yeah, it feels like we still haven't seen the best out of Johan Duran results wise. I mean, stuff wise, we know it's there. He casually has a fastball that averages 101.8 miles an hour. Like it's nothing. He put up an expected ERA of 2.60 last year, an expected batting average of 185. A ground ball rate at 66.2%, which is only like 11 points behind Andre Palante, which is pretty remarkable. And yeah, like first of all, like the 4-seamer is what it is, right? I mean, it's a dart, it's 102. I almost really wonder what it would look like if there was a more even balance between his four seam, his curve, and his splitter. Because the splitter is like really the famous one, right? I mean, it didn't get the best results last year, but a negative 14-degree launch angle is awesome. Somehow his split finger had the lowest whiff rate of all of his pitches. Um, by quite a large margin actually. But it did have the highest put away rate, so I would imagine he throws it a lot with two strikes or a decent amount with two strikes. Yeah, I mean this definitely is a more field pick than anything else, but he has a negative launch angle for his career, negative 2.3, had a negative 3.7 last year, and this is definitely a sort of investment pick. Like I know that he hasn't gotten the best. I mean, he's gotten very good results, but he hasn't gotten number four reliever in the league type results, but I feel like those can easily be coming.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, none of these guys that we're putting on the list are coming off like actual down years, like actual years where they were below average
Yeah,
pitcher. It's just the
some
standard for being a
yeah.
top 10 reliever is so high, at least on a rate basis. Like if you're like Emmanuel Clase had a 3.22 ERA last year, which is really good, but like he fell completely off of MLB Network's top 10, and it was you kind of understood why.
It's relievers are capable of so many magical things that when they look human, it's like, wow, this guy sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially like elite relievers.
Yeah, exactly. 100%, 100%. So my number four, you may have him higher. I imagine you would have him on the list, but I'm talking about Ryan Helsley. Um, or maybe you won't have him on because he was injured last year, but Ryan Helsley, among relievers with 100 plus innings over the last 2 years, he is top three in ERA, FIP, strikeout rate, and strikeout minus walk rate. Those are like maybe the four most important numbers to me when evaluating these pitchers, or at least with the top three with ERA, FIP, and strikeout minus walk rate. Tremendous to be top three in all of those. Granted, he only threw 36 innings last year, but it's kind of hard to project health, especially with relievers and pitchers in general. So like, yeah, like if he goes out and throws 65 innings this year, I have no reason to believe he won't be an amazing reliever. And along with that, that doesn't include the expected ERA, but expected ERA wise, last 2 years 2.04 and 2.25. That is remarkable. Really, really good stuff. He didn't qualify for percentiles this last year, but he was 99th percentile in 2022 in terms of expected ERA. So quality of contact and barrel rate have not been alarming either, or at least alarming enough. Very good sweet spot rate numbers each of the last 2 years. His barrel rate was cut by more than half last year, which was really good. That barrel rate was would have been like probably 90th percentile or higher last year if he did qualify. So yeah, I mean, all the numbers really, really favor Ryan Helsley. So that's, you could argue to have him higher than four, but I have him at number four right now.
I'll tell you right now, I put him at my 11.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It hurt because I really wanted to put him, but I think the thing about relievers is like with how good some people can be, like a down year can put you from number 3 to a number 11.
It's true.
And like I wouldn't be surprised if Ryan Helsley has the fourth best reliever season next year. But like coming off that, I always try to do safer picks, so to speak. Or I don't want to say I try to, but like it's easier to make the safer picks, and it's like, when you're coming off of a not a down year, but an injury year where you regressed a bit, like it can be tough.
Right.
Um, but the guy in my three is coming off of a remarkable year. It is Tanner Scott. I put him in my three.
Hmm.
It's very weird because you certainly don't, he's a name that you wouldn't have expected to have the third best reliever season, and even looking at his name, it felt like it could be a fluke, but I think this could be who he is. I mean, given the vibe, right? He feels like the kind of guy that, maybe thrives off of not walking people, has like a slightly above league average strikeout rate, gets soft contact, good lefty, maybe primarily faces lefties. No, he's the makings of an elite reliever in every sense of the word. He has a good fastball. He has good breaking stuff. He only throws two pitches, and they're pretty evenly thrown. But both of them are elite. Looking into it last year, his slider produced 16, a run value of 16, which doing that as a reliever is insane. That's very difficult to do. And his four-seam fastball had a run value of 9. So both of his pitches were, beyond elite last year. Both of them move very well, particularly his slider moves above average in both horizontal and vertical movement. He strikes out a lot of guys to the degree of a 98th percentile strikeout rate, 33.9%. Only a 7.8% walk rate. A lot of these guys had some, have struggles with their command, but it doesn't really matter because of how absurd their strikeout numbers are. No, Tanner Scott had a 60th percentile walk rate. He was an above average pitcher in walk rate while being among the best in strikeout rate. So he did that. He also upped his ground ball rate to 50%, which I like. He had a very low fly ball rate. Line drive rate around the league average, which is fine. Yeah, I didn't, Tanner Scott does not have the vibe of a top 3 reliever, but his numbers say that he is, and I think he can continue to be that in 2024.
Yeah, yeah. His it was pretty remarkable to see what he did last year, and like looking at the Baseball Savant page and seeing how bright that red is in every single category was that was what really sold it for me. My number 3 is a different lefty reliever, a guy who definitely his success definitely goes beyond 2023. It's Josh Hader. And yeah, like I typically do, and I definitely understand looking at it on a 2-year scale, because I typically do look at all of these rankings and look at all these players on a 2-year scale or maybe 3-year scale sometimes. But with how much of an outlier 2022 was for Josh Hader, I'm not considering it as much as I would another pitcher, because that really did take place in the span of 19 appearances in 2022. Those first 27 appearances that he had a 105 ERA and 1.71 FIP. Then he had the worst maybe 2 months of his life. And then his final 10 appearances, he had a 0 ERA and 0.97 FIP. And then last year he goes on to have goes on to win reliever of the year, I believe, with a 1.28 ERA, something like that. But nonetheless, last year he had the 3rd lowest ERA among relievers with 50 plus innings pitched, and he has 99th percentile expected ERA in 2018, 2019, 2021, and 2023. So that's all years except for 2020, which was the shortened season, and then 2022, where he had the worst 2 months of his life on the mound, which was pretty astounding, like how bad it was. But it seems like he's flipped the switch and turned it back on to regular Josh Hader form. So I'm just kind of relying on him to be back at that level. The Crawford boxes thing, that does play a bit of a factor, but I feel like I'll have to see it to see what impact it may have. So now on to your number 2 reliever in baseball for 2024.
Yeah, my number 2. I feel like the top 2, it can be interchangeable in order, but it's a pretty clear top 2. I have Devin Williams in my 2, a guy that we mentioned earlier, who I think maybe the Brewers should trade if they're going to go down this route of selling. But let's talk about what he did, whether it be last year, whether it be 2 years, his whole career. And I mean, when you're talking about Devin Williams, you're talking about changeups, right? That's just what you're doing. Very famously, the Airbender is among the best pitches in the league. He's consistently put up in 3 of the last 4 years, including 2020. His changeup has had a run value above 10, which is a count stat that relievers very rarely get to. He's done it 3 times with 1 pitch, which is remarkable. He has thrown 1,406 changeups with 40 inches of downward movement and 17 inches of arm side movement over the last 4 years. Nobody else has done more than 421, and he has done 1,406, which is also a very famous number in baseball lore to begin with. Looking into it, otherwise, his 4-seam fastball would be most pitchers. There are guys that would kill to have Devin Williams' fastball as their primary pitch, and that is his very clear secondary pitch. He averages 94.2 miles per hour, but he gets the most extension off the mound of any pitcher in baseball, 7.7 feet of extension. So his fastball is really more like 96 miles an hour, even though it's 94, which is an incredibly important thing. That's a major difference maker. That's how he got a 177 batting average with a 274 slugging and pretty similar expected numbers off of his four-seamer last year. That's also how he got a 41.8% whiff rate and 31.3% put away rate on his four-seam fastball. This is an ace type pitch, and it's his secondary pitch, which says so much more about his changeup than anything else. But I think anyone who knows about Devin Williams understands how good his changeup is to begin with. He has, he does have walk issues, but he struck out 37.7% of all batters faced last year. He gets good chase numbers, good whiff numbers, soft contact, better than most anyone in the league. A very good ground ball rate. And all of it culminates to, like I said, the second best reliever in the league going into 2024.
Yeah, for sure. And that extension point is pretty interesting because he's only, I mean, for a human it's tall, but for an MLB pitcher it's actually below average. He's 6'2".
Yeah, he's 6'2".
I think maybe he might have some longer arms or whatever, but also just good stride and whatnot. So, and seems to get good extension, which is pretty cool. But for my number 2, get your trumpets ready because we're talking about Edwin Diaz, who is coming back from his torn patellar tendon injury, which he suffered at the World Baseball Classic, and is coming back for 2024. And like when talking about Edwin Diaz, you can't talk about him without talking about how historic that 2022 season was. I mean, a 50% strikeout rate, 42% strikeout minus walk rate, and 0.90 FIP. That was absolutely historic. And why I don't have him number 1 off of that season is just because he was never at that level before his career. He was always very good, or at least most of the time very, very good, but never quite at that level. And also coming off an injury, I'm not sure that he is going to be, a sub 1 FIP pitcher, albeit I think he'll have an ERA and FIP, around 2 or something like that, which is very much, that is an elite reliever status. So you kind of have to do some guesswork, but based off that 2022, he is an amazing relief pitcher, and hopefully will recover from that injury pretty nicely. Your number 1 reliever in baseball for 2024
is Edwin Diaz. He put up an impossible season in 2022. A 50.2% strikeout rate, a 49.9% whiff rate. Half of all swings taken against Edwin Diaz pitches were missed. That is impossible. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say. A 1.69 expected ERA. We talk a lot about how expected statistics kind of rubber band each other. It's very hard to have an expected batting average above 300, even though it's kind of normal to have a regular batting average above 300. It's impossible practically to have an expected ERA at 1.69, even though a 1.69 ERA in a season out of a reliever is, it's not that much of an anomaly. You can't ignore. You can't. I mean, putting him at number 2 is fine as well because I get it. He missed the whole season, but if you remember, Chris, I put him in my single seasons draft midway in August of 2022. Because that's how good it was. Like, that season was so good that I was willing to look at every single season a reliever has ever had and be like, you know what? I'm gonna gamble on these last 2 months of Edwin Diaz and say that it's gonna be there when it's all said and done. And it was. It absolutely was. He lived up to that. He has better walk numbers than Devin Williams did last year. He does have him there. The extension is also very good with Edwin Diaz, and his slider is, I mean, it's everything, right? I mean, it's very far above the league average in velocity. A 91 mile per hour slider on average is very difficult. 2022 was actually the first season of his career where he threw his slider more often than his fastball. He threw it 313 times to righties, 226 times to lefties. So a fair amount to both. Only one home run given up in 539 pitches. In fact, one extra base hit given up in 539 pitches. A 114 batting average, 134 slugging, similar expected numbers. A launch angle in the single digits, so that produced a lot of ground balls. A 54.7% whiff rate, 38.4% put away rate. I could go on and on and on, but I can't. You know what? I know that he missed the season, and I get that that's probably a large part of the reason he's not in the one, but you can't just act like he didn't do that in 2022, and that's why I'm putting him in my one.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think part of also why I may have put another guy above him is like, that season did happen, but it is one season. And, looking at a 2-year sample from 2021 to 2022, ERA was at 2.38, but that FIP was 1.70, which is pretty
Yeah, I mean,
remarkable.
I know I said earlier I try to look at a 2-year span, and that's, I do remain consistent on that, but that season gets a pass because of how absurd it was.
Yeah, understood. So now my number one reliever is where your number two was. It's Devin Williams. And part of this might be just a shout out to him for like his entire career, or at least since 2020 when he was a rookie. It's just been he's just hasn't had a hiccup. He's been consistently great all 4 years. Whereas I think most of the players on this list either haven't been in the league for 4 years, or within those 4 years have had maybe a little bit of a hiccup where they weren't an elite reliever. Devin Williams has been an elite reliever since he was a rookie, which you can't say about every single person on this list. Among relievers with 150 plus innings since the start of 2020, Williams has the lowest ERA and second lowest FIP and second highest strikeout rate. And I get looking on a 4-year scale is a little bit long, but I'm just trying to emphasize, like, he has been amazing all throughout. His worst year was 2021, and he had a 2.50 ERA. That's just very, very elite. And I think he's just going to continue that. And he's just one of the more reliable guys on this list, and I think that has a value in its own right. Maybe he doesn't have the highest ceiling of this group, but I think he does have. He just has a great track record, and he also has youth on his side. He's not. I think he's age 28 or 29 or something like that season. So yeah, I don't see that performance dwindling anytime soon. And yeah, he's been like the class of the reliever position, because when talking about the class of the reliever position, Edwin Diaz, obviously historic 2022, but not as good of a 2021. Josh Hader obviously had his blow up in 2022. Ryan Helsley has only been around for like 2 years. Same with Andres Munoz. Emmanuel Clase's numbers got a little bit worse last year, whereas Devin Williams has just been in the cream of the crop, just consistently for 4 years now. So that's why I put him number one. Shout out to Devin Williams. Yeah, do we want to mention our honorable mentions, because there were a lot of guys I really considered?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that Ryan Helsley was my 11. I went very back and forth between he and Camilo Doval before eventually landing on Doval. Ryan Presley was one of my honorable mentions. Brian Abreu, Ryan Walker, both of my underrated reliever picks from the all underrated team were in my consideration. I wanted to get Minter up and moving, but I decided against that, unfortunately. There were definitely others as well. Clase was one of them, obviously. He didn't end up making my list. I deleted them, but there were others.
Yeah, my guys that
Chris Martin.
Yep. My guys I had in consideration were Camilo Doval, who probably was my 11 as well. He was your number 10. I also was considering David Bednar, who you had as your 7. Brian Abreu, like you mentioned. Chris Martin, like you mentioned. Evan Phillips just missed the list. I think part of it is just I feel like that underlying numbers suggest maybe his ERA might rise a little bit, and which like if you're not projected to have like an ERA below 2.5, you can't just be in the list.
Get out of here.
Also, Pete Fairbanks in consideration as well, considering how great his numbers have been over the last 2 years, but he's just been kind of injured as well.
Very.
Yeah, so yeah, but to review our 10 through 1, I'll start with mine. It goes Jose Alvarado number 10, Matt Brash number 9, Yohan Duran number 8, Tanner Scott at number 7, Emmanuel Clase at number 6, Andres Munoz at number 5, number 4 was Ryan Helsley, number 3 was Josh Hader, number 2 is Edwin Diaz, and number 1, Devin Williams.
Yeah, so for my number 10, I had Camilo Doval. Number 9, Evan Phillips. Number 8, Andres Munoz. Number 7, David Bednar. Number 6, Josh Hader. Number 5, Matt Brash. Number 4, Yohan Duran. Number 3, Tanner Scott. Number 2, Devin Williams. And number 1 was Edwin Diaz.
Fantastic. Well,
that first trumpets in 2024 is gonna hit so different.
oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm very excited about it. And yeah, Edwin Diaz, by the way, like he's been in the league for a long time, but still only 30. So no reason to think that this injury is gonna affect him a crazy amount, considering age and whatnot. But yeah, now on to second baseman. A little bit of an odd position, because a lot of the players that seem to do well hitting are not as good defensively, and some of the players that are not as good hitting are great defensively and great on the bases. So ranking some above others just seemed weird. The confidence I have in my picks here is marginal, but I think we can make a solid case for a lot here. I think what everyone agrees on is a consensus top 3. I think everyone kind of has the same top 3, depending on order. But yeah, so I'll start with second base here. My number 10 is kind of a newer guy to the class of the position, but I was kind of impressed with what he did this past year, and I'm talking about Bryson Stott, who was a shortstop in 2022, and then the Phillies signed Trey Turner. So Bryson Stott moved over to second base, and he made a very good transition. He was 7th in F4 among second basemen, with 50% of the games played at the position last year. 7th among them in F4, which is the whole package. And when considering that whole package, I'm talking about a 104 OPS plus, 17 outs above average, 6 defensive runs saved, 31 for 34 on stolen base attempts, and a 49% extra base taken rate on the bases. Was also 5th among all fielders in outs above average, and 2nd among second basemen in BSR. Also, to get into some of the improvements he made from 2022 to 2023, he had some very encouraging drops in whiff rate, strikeout rate, and pop-up rate, and had an increase in sweet spot rate that put him 71st percentile. Also, he's a younger guy heading into his age 26 season. So yeah, he put up some very solid whole package numbers last year. Was an above average hitter, great on the bases, and great on defense as well, which garners him a top 10 position for me. Who do you have as your number 10?
So in my 10, I put a guy who had a down year last year, but looked good in 2022. I put Andres Jimenez in my 10. Batted ball profile looks pretty bad, but his defense was pretty outstanding last year, as it's been for the last few years. And I mean, his defense almost by itself earned him a top 10 spot here. 14.9 defensive runs above average last year, 12 in 2022, 100th percentile in outs above average at 18, and also a 93rd percentile sprint speed, and an 84th percentile base running run value, along with a 99th percentile fielding run value. So across the board, he is among the best defenders in all of baseball. And he did have a 6-win season in 2022, a random 142 weighted runs created plus, which I think we kind of figured wasn't quite sustainable, and he'd regressed down to a 97. But you know what? Being a league average hitter is all he needs to do with his other skill set to be a 3.5 win player every year. And I think that's good enough for top 10 at the position. And I have no reason to believe he can't do that again next year. So as long as he stays between 95 to 105 weighted runs created plus, and anything higher than 105 would be excellent. But with that defense and base running, I think there's a fair case that he's a top 10 hitter or top 10 player at second base. He also dropped his strikeout rate last year by 2%. Walk rate has remained relatively consistent. And yeah, I have Andres Jimenez in my 10.
Yes, shout out Andres Jimenez. My number 9 is this might be controversial, but I'm talking about Luis Ariz, who, great offensive pedigree, even disregarding like, oh, he's got back-to-back batting titles, which obviously, has its merit, but isn't everything. Still, like, sabermetrically speaking, also a very, very good hitter. 131 OPS plus over the last 2 seasons from Luis Ariz, and he has the second highest OPS among second basemen with 800 plus plate appearances over the last 2 years. However, why I don't have him higher is that defense and that base running. He has a 36% extra base taken rate over the last 2 years and is 7 for 13 on stolen bases. So just an overall negative on the bases when he does get on, which is a high amount of time nonetheless. But also in 2023, he had negative 13 outs above average. Although I will say, maybe in defense of him, defensive metrics are very, very weird on him. He has negative 38 career outs above average, but positive 8 career defensive run saves. So defensive run saves actually views him as a good defender, but outs above average has him very negatively. And I kind of trust that more just based on like, he's not as athletic as a lot of the other players on this list. So I kind of trust the outs above average a little bit more. But yeah, that offensive pedigree is high, but obviously batting average isn't everything, and defense and base running does matter. I know I think Mike Petriello and MLB Network each had him in their top 5. So yeah, it might be a little bit of a hot take to put him at number 9. Who do you have as your number 9?
Chris, it is not a hot take. Put Luis Ariz at number 9. I have him there too. Yeah. You pretty much nailed it. You said everything that I was going to say. Certainly he is an anomaly of a hitter, right? A 5.5% strikeout rate is absurd. No matter what the year is, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff we would look at from a guy in like 1881 and be like, man, a 5% strikeout rate, how do you do that? Well, Luis Ariz did it last year. Casually put up a 393 on base percentage. And yeah, the offense is awesome. It's going to be very, very hard for him to replicate. Yeah, I mean, he is a very good hitter. He's, there are certain skill sets within hitting that he is better at than anybody else in baseball. It's still very hard to maintain a 31% line drive rate with the, additionally, everything else that comes with that. But yeah, in terms of the defense and the base running, the defense particularly, I thought that his defense was going to improve because he was moving from first base over to second base between 2022 and 23. He played a lot of first base in 2022. I figured that moving to second base would help him out a lot. It didn't. He had, relatively similar defensive numbers at second base, which is definitely a cause for concern because, bad defense at first base is the default, but bad defense at second base is you're one of the worst in the league at it. And that's kind of what he was last year. And yeah, that is why I had him at number 9. The defense is very concerning coming from a defense-heavy position, and it is Luis Ariz. He is the best at certain skill sets of hitting in all of baseball, but those skill sets are very, very hard to sustain.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, what I'll say about Ariz is like there's only a couple guys on this list that I would take I would take their hitting over him, and hitting as a whole package, OPS,
Yeah.
slugging.
If we were talking about hitting, I would at least put him in number 5 at the very worst.
Yeah, 100%. Like his hitting prowess is very, very good. But yeah, and I'm trying to just wanted to add another point and seeing how many games he played at first base in 2022. But yeah, he played first base on the Twins, who had Jorge Polanco at second base, who's also a negative defender. So they put a negative defender above Luis Ariz with the Twins. So if that's kind of where the teams evaluated him, is like that, okay, he's more of a first baseman than like Jorge Polanco would be, who's just like not a good defender either. And maybe that's why I compared the two earlier in the show. But just one moment, please. Yeah, he played 65 games at first base in 2022 as opposed to
like 30 something games at second, right?
41. So close, yeah,
41.
pretty close. So yeah, like they had Jorge Polanco playing against him, which speaks measures because he's a negative defender. And that leads into my number 8 pick, who is sort of similar to Luis Arraez, except a little bit better defense. I'm talking about Ketel Marte, who, it was a Marte Parte last year. He had a very good year last year. Looking at the longer term scale, he has a 118 OPS plus over the last 2 seasons. And last year, that OPS plus was 128, which was very, very good, and also had positive defense, and was 4th in FWAR among second basemen last year, or at least among second basemen who played half their games at the position. And Saber, underlying numbers wise, very good as well, was 70th percentile or higher in strikeout rate, walk rate, whiff rate, chase rate, and expected WOBA. So yeah, with Ketel Marte, like he's an interesting player because we thought he was going to be a breakout, especially after his 2019 where he finished 4th in the MVP. He kind of regressed after that, but he's sort of had a little bit of a career revival, and you can do that when when you start out as well as young as he was. He's still like kind of in the middle of his career. So yeah, him improving his offensive numbers was very encouraging last year. For me to rank him a little bit higher, I need to see him to repeat that success. Who do you have as your number 8?
I also have Ketel Marte in my 8. Yeah, we're
Wow.
agreeing pretty strongly on this list so far. Yeah, Ketel Marte, in terms of people, I'd say from like 4 through 10 on this list, is one of the most balanced shortstops in baseball in terms of having a more diverse skill set than most others, right? I mean, he has a very good offensive profile. He hits the ball, at first of all, 91 mile per hour exit velocity. That's obviously very good in 465 plate appearances coming from the second base position. And he's kind of consistently been in that range since 2019. He's had a exit velocity over 90 in 4 of the last 5 seasons. He also keeps the ball off the ground pretty good enough. His ground ball rate has always been around the league average, maybe a little above, maybe a little below. So his batted ball profile has been pretty average. And defense, he's been above average, at the position. Generally speaking, in terms of outs above average, he had his best year since 2018 in 2023. So that's good. His base running has always been fine. Yeah, I don't know. That's another thing, he's very good with striking out and walking. He had a 10.9 strikeout, or excuse me, a 10.9 walk rate last year, which was the highest of his career. And he had a 16.8% strikeout rate, down a couple percent from 2022. Yeah, I don't know. Ketel Marte has just been kind of weirdly consistent to the point where there's just not much to really say, it feels like.
Right. And
But I do have him in my 8.
Yeah, when I was talking about 70th percentile, I forgot to mention average exit velocity, which you talked about, 91 miles per hour. He also, was I think 77th percentile in average exit velocity or something like that. But yeah, now on to my number 7, who a guy has a high profile. I think fans really like him, might rank him higher, but also MLB Network left him completely off their top 10, if I'm not mistaken. But for my number 7, I'm talking about Ozzie Albies, the Braves second baseman, who had a 124 OPS plus last year and the 5th most FWAR among second basemen last year. Also a 63% extra base taken rate. As we talked about before, that's going first to third on singles, first to home on doubles, second to home on singles. And Ozzie Albies was 21 percentage points above league average last year, which is pretty remarkable. Where a lot of people may have concern is that defense, outs above average wise, he went from +4 to -10 from 2022 to 2023. However, his defensive runs saved actually increased. So it kind of goes to my narrative of like, single year defensive numbers can be a little bit squirrely, and I think that outs above average drop might be a little bit weird, and maybe he's not a positive 4 outs above average guy, but I can't imagine he's going to repeat a negative 10 outs above average guy, or repeat as a guy who has negative 10 outs above average. And if he does, he'll go down this list. But I'll need to see that happen for me to take that, or for me to consider his defense as heavily as that. But yeah, considering offense and how he had a 124 OPS plus last year and the 5th most F4 among second basemen, yeah, I put him number 7. Who do you have as your 7?
I have a guy that you put at number 10. I put Bryson Stott in my 7. There are things that I really like that he did last year. He increased his line drive rate by 25%. And with guys like Bryson Stott, I feel like their offensive profile is really determined by how good their line drive rate is. If you're not going to hit for power, at least hit for average as best as you can. And the way to do that is by hitting line drives, because not only is it good for hitting for average, but also you'll get some extra bases out of that as well. If you're quick enough, you're good at placing the ball enough. And Bryson Stott, did that a lot better last year. He also is, tremendous at defense. And, he certainly makes a difference on a team that has been desperate for defense for a few years now in Philadelphia. But also, doesn't strike out really a whole lot, 15.6%, whiffs at 15.1%. Sweet spot rate is very good, 36.4%. That's a few percent above the league average. Base running, he's very good. I feel like, there are a lot of second basemen that have not great overall offensive profiles. Bryson Stott, I think, is a little better in terms of his batted balls. I think last year he put up a 748 OPS, and I think that's pretty similar to what he's capable of in the long run.
Right.
On top of that, very good defender, very good base runner. An absolute difference maker in Philadelphia. The biggest improvement that he made was fastballs. In 2022, he had a minus 14 run value against fastballs, against four seamers. He hit 178, slugged 281. Expected numbers were also very uninspiring. But in 2023, he hit 286, slugged 427. That's the pitch you're seeing the most. So being able to make that kind of improvement is huge. And if he can do that again, he doesn't even really need to be a crazy good offensive player. He just has to be, maybe I'd like to see like 105 to 110 and in weighted runs created plus, and then obviously defense and base running if he just keeps doing what he's doing. I think 7's a very appropriate place for him.
Yeah. Talk about, Bryson Stott was really a whole package guy last year, and for that reason, you might get undervalued from the fans' perspective. But top 5 among all fielders and outs above average, and 31 for 34 on stolen bases. He was tremendous away from the plate and was above average at the plate. My number 6. So I think this confirms that we have the same 10, because my number 6 is your number 10. I'm talking about Andres Gimenez, who I think, there's some other candidates, but I think he is the best fielder of this group. He has the most defensive runs above average among second basemen the last 2 seasons, and he also has won back-to-back Gold Gloves, so the writers agree on it as well. And then on the bases, he is also 50 for 59 on stolen bases the last 2 seasons, and has a 47% extra base taken rate and 5.9 BSR over the last 2 years. Obviously, where everyone would be alarmed, and understandably so, is that hitting, where his OPS took a 125-point drop from 2022 to 2023, and even expected numbers wise, that took a drop as well. His expected WOBA dropped 29 points. And a lot of that had to do with him hitting the ball a lot softer. His average exit velocity was like 3rd percentile, or maybe even worse. And that average exit velocity dropped 3 miles per hour. However, with that being so dramatic and so uncharacteristic from the rest of his career, I feel like that may level out, and that may increase. That may, if he does level it out, that will increase his hitting production. And then, if that's added to his already amazing defensive prowess and solid base running, that is a really good second baseman to have. And also to consider with Andres Gimenez, like with how successful he was so early on, he's still a guy heading into his age 25 season. Like he is very, very young and can easily figure some things out, you know, to improve his game and get closer to that 2022 level. Who do you have as your number 6?
At number 6, I have Ozzy Albies. You put him at 7, so we're pretty close on him. Yeah, I thought putting him at 6 was going to be a hot take, and then MLB Network completely left him off their list. So that was pretty shocking. I have 4.5 minutes to do this. Should be fine. Ozzy Albies has been one of the most consistent bats at the second base position for the last few years, and last year was no different. You know, he's one of those guys, like kind of like Jorge Polanco, where I talked about earlier, where, you know, even if you don't have the most power, as long as you have like a fair enough average exit velocity, if you can hit enough fly balls and pull the ball enough, you'll find your way into enough home runs. And Ozzy Albies did exactly that. He had a 33.8% fly ball rate last year. That's 10% above the league average. He pulled the ball at a 51.7% rate last year. The league average is 37%. And what did he do? He hit 33 home runs. Yes, his expected slugging is about 50 points below his actual slugging, but that's kind of just what happens. You pull the ball enough, hit the ball hard enough, even if you're just like even a little bit below league average and average exit velocity, you'll be fine. And that's exactly what he did. I did have to knock him down for his defense, though. He is in the second percentile in outs above average. He had -6 defensive runs above average last year. And his base running has been still very good, but the fielding for me is what did it. But yeah, I mean, he has been one of the most consistent bats at the second base position. And, I think he fits very nicely in that Braves lineup. He, despite, being a 5'8" and 165 pounds. I mean, he's still putting up 30 home run seasons just because he hits enough pulled fly balls to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And especially when he's hitting lefty, he's a switch hitter, as most people know, but as a lefty hitting it pole side, like I think it's 325 to the right field foul pole over at Truist Park. So as someone who did a pitcher career mode as a Braves player, that was very frustrating, but in MLB The Show, but when you're a hitter, it benefits you tremendously. So having those pulled fly balls is great, especially when you're a left-handed hitter. And for Ozzy Albies, he was tied for 11th in terms of most pulled fly balls last season. So that adds to your point there. And for my number 5, he makes a pretty good chant. Ha-Sung Kim. Ha-Sung Kim. Shout out to the 2022 playoffs. But yeah, he's my number 5. Shout out my 2023 Padres player to watch, which wasn't the most risky pick, but I did want to give him a shout out because yeah, he's a top 5 second baseman in baseball as far as I have it this year. Over the last 2 years, and this has been not only last year's production, but the year before as well. For much of last year, he was like an MVP candidate, or at least for the nerds, he was. Dropped off a little bit towards the end, but still a very, very good season. And over the last 2 seasons, he is averaging a 107 OPS plus, 54% extra base taken rate, which is 12 percentage points above league average, and 8.5 outs above average, 14 defensive runs saved, and 25 stolen bases per year. That's what he's averaging over the last 2 seasons. He benefited from the rule changes from a base running front. He went from 12 to 38 stolen bases last year, and he was 6th among second basemen in F4, or he's been 6th among second basemen in F4 over the last 2 seasons, and he was 3rd last season. And there's some things to be very optimistic on with his offensive game over the last couple of years. He has increased his walk rate and sweet spot rate and decreased his pop-up rate in both 2022 and 2023. So he made those numbers better in 2022 and then made them better once again the next season. So that's very encouraging. And then when considering his elite base running and defense, that puts him over the edge as a top 5 guy for me. Who do you have as your number 5?
I also have Ha-Sung Kim in my 5. I think there's a chance we might have the same top 5.
Yeah,
it's very possible. Yeah, I mean, you said it. I mean, he's among the best defenders in the league, certainly the best at his position. And I mean, the fact that they had to kick Fernando Tatis Jr. to the outfield to make room for him in the middle infield kind of says, I feel like everything you need to know about his defense, right? You know, they had to have him in the lineup, or at least on the diamond, because he is a difference maker out there for the Padres. And yeah, you know, he was a league average bat last year. Expected statistics suggest he's going to be a little less, but that's all right, because you know that's only expected statistics are very rarely, you know, 1-to-1 with what actually happens. When you know when they are, it's kind of a story that we point out. But I mean, all of the little things he does very well. Sweet spot rate was very high last year. Line drive rate around league average. All of his ball profile was pretty close to league average last year. But K to walk ratio is very good. Only a 19.8% strikeout rate, 12% walk rate. Yeah, I mean it was just a very tremendous year for him, and yeah, MVP candidate for some of the season, which was a pretty fun development for the few weeks that lasted. Yeah, I mean, I feel like everything that I was gonna say, you already said. Yeah, Ha-Seong Kim I have in my five.
Yeah, that's the tough thing about going second in these lists is sometimes you're bound to sort of repeat what the other said or have your dialogue reduced a little bit. My number 4 is likely your number 4 as well. Talking about Nico Horner of the Chicago Cubs. He's like, when we talked about some of the guys before in this list that you know, some of these guys ahead of like Luis Ariz or Ketel Marte, they're going to have worse hitting numbers, but they're going to have way better base running and defensive numbers. And Nico Horner is like the prime example of that. He's been like an average hitter over the past 2 years, but he has been the best base runner of this group and one of the best defenders of the group. He has the most stolen bases and BSR among second basemen over the last 2 seasons, and the second most defensive runs above average among current second basemen. And over the last 2 years, he has the 4th most FWAR, and he had the 3rd most FWAR last year. 43 stolen bases last year was pretty tremendous, while only getting caught 7 times. The year before, he was 20 for 22 on stolen bases, and was or might have been a Gold Glover last year. Well, being an average hitter and elite base runner. So, pretty stellar, just overall player. Have to look at the whole package when you're talking about Nico Horner, and that whole package reveals he is a very good player. Who is your number 4?
You nailed it. Yep, I have Nico Horner in my 4 as well. Again, he's very good at several different aspects of baseball. He's a tremendous defender at the position, and also a tremendous base runner. Yeah, I mean the best base runner out of the group probably, but also outside of Luis Ariz, maybe the best at contact. I mean, a 99th percentile whiff rate as a hitter at only 12.4%, a 96th percentile strikeout rate at 12.11%. And he actually has some of the smallest discrepancies between his actual numbers and his expected numbers from last year. His expected slugging was 355, which is not good by any means, but he only slugged 383. And his batting average was high enough, and his walk rate was like okay enough to where he put up a 346 OBP, which I'm not complaining about. That's probably definitely gonna carry his OPS a little more than his slugging does, even if his slugging is, technically a higher number. But regardless, I think he's very good with that. Going deeper into his strikeout stuff in particular, he had an 8% strikeout rate against four-seam fastballs last year, which ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th best. Minimum 150 plate appearances ending on four-seam fastballs. That is a list of 132 hitters, in which, again, Nico Horner ranked 5th. So, he's very good at contact, and not to mention he also hit 307 against four-seamers last year with a 470 slugging, and his expected numbers were, off that, but still not that far off. So that was something he did a very good job of last year. A lot of the reason I put him in my 4 is because again, the pitcher seeing the most is four-seamers in 99% of circumstances. So if you can hit those very well, you're going to find your way into good numbers, and that's what Nico Horner's done.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, shout out Nico Horner. Also, he was my second baseman in the MLB All Underrated team. And based on some of the rankings I've seen, I think that holds some merit. So yeah, that definitely holds some merit because MLB Network had him number 10 on the list. And I think that's a little bit unfair towards Mr. Horner. So now on to my number 3, which will likely be another overlap and very understandably so because of how kind of concrete things are over here in the top 3. I'm talking about Marcus Semien, a 2023 MVP finalist, Marcus Semien, and also the health king, just playing 160 games like it's nothing. But nonetheless, Marcus Semien is second among second basemen in F4 over the last 2 seasons. He led second baseman in F4 last year, and he had a 122 OPS plus, 15 outs above average, and 16 defensive runs saved last year. It's that elite defense that guys like Horner, Stott, Jimenez were providing, but much better hitting. So that's what puts him over the edge. And over the last 2 years, he has a 55% extra base taken rate, which is elite. And he is third among current projected second basemen in BSR over the last 2 years. So yeah, just he's another whole package guy, but also has the hitting to go with it. And yeah, elite guy. And also, just as an aside, not even making my case for him, he had the most pulled fly balls last year at 77. Next best was 59. He had 18 more pulled fly balls than the next highest hitter. So yeah. But all that being said, just an elite second baseman and one of the best players in the game. Who do you have number 3?
This is actually not an overlap, believe it or not. I put Jose Altuve in my 3. I'm sure you have him in your 2. There was a lot of things that kind of concerned me with him last year. I mean, he obviously did play coming off of an injury. He hurt his wrist playing in the World Baseball Classic after getting hit by a pitch, I believe it was, right? And he put together a season where he had his highest strikeout rate in a full season since at least before the StatCast era. He also put up his highest ground ball rate by 8% over last year. He went from 41% to 49.3% ground ball rate last year. That's his highest ground ball rate in a full season since 2019. He had his lowest fly ball rate since 2017, which, to be fair, pretty good year for him. Also his lowest line drive rate in a full season, again, since 2019. So I do want to see a bit of a better batted ball profile out of him in the next year. He's going into age 34 now, and he's like one of the last hopes we have for a while to get to 3,000 hits. He got to 2,000 last season. So in terms of that, I feel like there are some improvements for him to get back to in terms of his batted ball profile. He's still doing very well with striking out, with walking, with swing and missing, still very elite in those respects. However, he did also chase quite a bit last year. He had a 32% chase rate, 4% up from 2022, his highest in a full season since 2015. So, there were some things where he may have regressed a bit, but certainly it's Jose Altuve, so it's very possible he can get back there. But yeah, I did put him in my 3 for those reasons. But obviously, right? I mean, he is still at number 3 for a reason. He's put up back-to-back 900 OPS seasons, even if it was only 410 plate appearances last year. He's a guy that has always outperformed his expected numbers. But there are actual batted ball differences here that I do worry about a bit going into the future.
Right. And yeah, he greatly outperformed his expected numbers last year. I think, yeah, it was a 62-point difference in WOBA and expected WOBA. Usually he outperforms it by around 30. So there could be definitely some regression, especially based on those underlying numbers you were talking about with the batted ball profile. But why I have Jose Altuve at number 2 is just that pedigree he has, even through injuries. Leads second baseman in F4 over the last 2 seasons, despite missing 72 games last year. So definitely on a game per game basis, he's been far and away the best second baseman over the last 2 years. And and leads in F4, even considering the amount of games he and the rest of the competition have played. And among second basemen with 800 plus plate appearances over the last 2 years, Altuve has the highest OPS by 89 points. And that is while having fairly neutral defense and base running. So not something that's going to hold him back in this conversation, like Luis, that conversation would hold him back with Luis Arraez. Like Luis Arraez had the second highest OPS in that group, but his defense and base running holds him back. Not the case with Jose Altuve. He has the elite offense while not being a detriment defensively or on the bases. So yeah, I mean, I think what has him so high for me is just he is like among the players who have played second base, he's been so much better than the rest of the competition at the plate. So now on to your number two. Yeah, your number two.
My number two, this is where I put Marcus Semien. You had him in your three, so we did flip-flop on Altuve and Semien, and I feel like they are pretty interchangeable. But nonetheless, I did put Semien at two. A 35.4% ground ball rate and a 46.9% pull rate. And like I've said repeatedly, you pull the ball enough, you hit it in the air enough, you'll find your way into the count statistics. For Marcus Semien, that was 29 home runs last year at age 32. He had, when he signed that contract with the Rangers, a lot of people questioned how, if it was going to work out and how soon was his potential decline going to be. And he's really only gotten better in many respects. In terms of defense, he just put up his 99th percentile. That's above average. He was as low as first percentile in 2020. And he only had one good defensive season before 2021 when he played his Blue Jays season. So something changed with his defense when he left Oakland. But, I mean, he has been incredible defensively, no matter where you look, really. And, he's also gotten better with striking out. He just had his lowest strikeout rate in a season, at least in the StatCast era, at 14%. He had his highest walk rate in a full season since 2019 at 9.6% last year. Sweet spot rate, his highest since 2017, a 37.5% sweet spot rate. Also, base running is still very good as well. Despite being 32, he's still at 85th percentile sprint speed. He's making smart base running decisions, like you mentioned. Obviously he's not hitting the ball super hard. His expected numbers are naturally going to be lower than his actual numbers because of his hitting style. A lot of pulled fly balls. But other than that, there was really nothing that he hasn't excelled in and that he didn't excel in last year. And yeah, also being available, right? He did this despite 753 plate appearances. Didn't really look worn down in the postseason either. Still hit very well there. And yeah, I have Marcus Semien in my two.
Yeah. And yeah, you mentioned that defensive improvement since 2021. He probably just has been built more as a second baseman than a shortstop.
He probably has been because he was playing shortstop in Oakland.
Yeah, he was a primarily a shortstop before he arrived in Toronto, and then he ran into Bo Bichette, and then when he goes to the Rangers, Corey Seager gets signed as well, so he's not going to be the shortstop. But it seems like it's been positive for Marcus Semien's career to be a second baseman, because at shortstop he was kind of a whatever defender compared to the rest of the league, at least, and now he's an elite second base defender. So happy for him in that respect. My number one, and I'm sure your number one as well, is a guy who has not been a primary second baseman since the minors, but he is coming back, and he is going to be the primary second baseman for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and it's one of the best players in all of baseball. That is Mookie Betts. Mookie Betts trails only Aaron Judge and Freddie Freeman in position player F4 among all players over the last 2 seasons. He was also second among all position players in F4 last season. Over the last 2 years, he has a 152 OPS plus, and last year he had a 163 OPS plus. From 2022 to 2023, he increased his average exit velocity 1.9 miles per hour and line drive rate 6.3 percentage points. So despite him being in the league for almost a decade now, he's still found a way to make improvements, which is very, very encouraging. Also, with considering his amount of time in the league, still pretty young, still in his early 30s, and doesn't seem to be getting any worse and seems to be getting better. And last year was just an exclamation point of a season. He was 94th percentile or higher in average exit velocity, sweet spot rate, chase rate, and all expected numbers. So along with him getting a 987 OPS, 163 OPS plus, and 39 home runs, the process results were also still there. Like, he was elite in the underlying numbers as well as the on the surface numbers, which, the on the surface numbers got him to be a MVP runner up. But those process numbers are going to probably, keep him around that level. So he is definitely the number one second baseman in all of baseball.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how much there is for me to add. It's kind of a given, right? I mean, we all know how good Mookie Betts is. We all know that he's quite far above anyone else listed at the second base position. And, I mean, the defense will definitely be interesting this year. We had actually a down year defensively in the outfield, but you can't even really look at defensive numbers to evaluate his case here because he just hasn't played a lot of second base, or at least recently. But offensively, he's everything, literally everything. The worst percentile on his batting is 82nd percentile barrel rate, which is a joke. I mean, it's absolutely insane. He's another guy that hits fastballs extremely well. A run value per 100 over 2 in four-seam fastballs over the last 2 years, respectively. That is insane. That's very hard to do. Also, a 2 run value per 100 in sinkers and sliders. So there's really not a pitch that you can get by him. And he's elite against several different pitches. And again, high pull rate, high fly ball rate, very low ground ball rate, 27.6%. He has a higher line drive rate than ground ball rate, which is like outrageous, like just completely insane. Yeah, I mean, Mookie Betts is number one.
Right, yeah, and to go to his fielding, he played 70 games at second and started 62 games there, played 485 innings there, and it looks like he had 6 defensive runs saved there. Outs above average was a little bit more hesitant on him, but still, like, that means that he is not, he didn't take much adjusting to the second base position when he did play second base last year. And heading into his age 31 season, which is pretty remarkable. And yeah, like, just as an aside, maybe, non-analytically speaking, like, Mookie Betts is one of the rare players that makes the game of baseball look easy. It just seems to all come naturally to him. He's also, not of overwhelming size, only 5'9". He's listed at 180 pounds, but still manages to hit 39 home runs last year. Speeds around the bases really well, plays really good defense. When his swing is very short, but still very strong. And it just seems to come very naturally to him. So, I miss him, but yeah. I love, but it's great still great to watch him and have him succeed. And, we also talked about, the Hall of Famers playing right now, or like, who, if they retired, would get in. Like, Mookie Betts is in that category for me right now. Like, if he retired right now, he's a Hall of Famer. He's earned that. He has 64 wins above replacement right now. Unbelievable. So yeah, shout out to Mookie Betts. Want to give out your 10 through 1 here?
Sure. Number 10, I had Andres Jimenez. Number 9, Luis Ariz. Number 8, Ketel Marte. Number 7, Bryson Stott. Number 6, Ozzy Albies. Number 5, Ha-Sung Kim. Number 4, Nico Horner. Number 3, Jose Altuve. Number 2, Marcus Semien. Number 1, Mookie Betts. My honorable mentions, Zach Geloff and Thairo Estrada.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, Estrada was interesting, especially with his defensive numbers the way they were.
Yep.
Yeah, my number 10 was Bryson Stott. Number 9 was Luis Ariz. Number 8, Ketel Marte. Number 7 was Ozzy Albies. 6 was Andres Jimenez. Number 5, Ha-Sung Kim. Number 4, Nico Horner. Number 3, Marcus Semien. Number 2, Jose Altuve. And number 1, Mookie Betts. So albeit different order, we had the same 10, which very different from the relief pitchers because this was sort of easier to get a grasp of at second base. But yeah, anything more before we wrap this up?
No, I think that's all we had. That was a very lengthy podcast today.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I mean when the Orioles go out and get the best pitcher on the market, that is some news to talk about for sure. And then obviously 2 positional rankings once again. And that does it for positional rankings. We've decided in the middle of the show, off recording, that we are going to be starting our top 50 players in baseball 2 weeks from now. We'll do 50 through 41. We'll do 10 at a time. So the week before we do our MLB predictions or MLB standings predictions, we will be doing our 10 through 1 of that. And then that will be, and those rankings will be talked about after we do our divisional breakdowns, where we pick a player from each team from a certain division to watch, and also just kind of break down, or not necessarily break down, but talk briefly about what the team has done in the offseason and whatnot, and just the state of the team. So yeah, exciting stuff ahead. Still some more offseason housekeeping to do, and excited to do it. So without further ado, we will wrap up the show. That does it for this installment of Above Replacement Radio. If you enjoyed the episode, go to the YouTube channel and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is called Above Replacement Radio. Check out all the playlists, the digital shorts, all that. We have playlists for all these positional breakdowns, as well as Hall of Fame bubble cases. If you felt like maybe somebody got snubbed in the Hall of Fame this past year and want to gather up some information as to why, go check out the bubble cases, because we still have plenty of guys
if you're looking for reason to believe that Omar Vizquel should have gotten more than 20% of the vote this year, come to our page.
Yes, absolutely. We're big stans. But yeah, check all that out. There's still some guys on the ballot that we broke down either 3 years ago or even this year. So go make sure to check all of that out. Also follow me on Twitter at Chris_Giant. Follow Daniel on both Twitter and Instagram at Daniel_Curran, and follow the show Instagram at Above Replacement Radio for all the show needs. We hope you enjoyed this one, and we hope to see you next time, where we will be talking all the happenings in Major League Baseball once again. See you then.